Harry Potter the Mutant Obscurus Gamer. Chapter 1 New Game. In a place outside of reality was a room carved of 16-dimensional space. Within sat 5 of the most powerful existences in the omniverse known as Marvel. The room itself, if described from a 4-dimensional perspective, would appear to be crafted of sculpted crystals with each facet of every surface reflecting a different indescribable color of light. However, regardless of the beauty of the room from a mortal perspective, the closest term that could be used to describe the layout of the room would be the word bar. Eternity, Infinity, Lady Death, and the Living Tribunal were considered among, if not at the very peak of beings that exist. Lady Death had also invited the Phoenix Force whom she encountered earlier trying to save a 10-year-old girl. The girl in question was trying to save a dying friend and almost found herself dragged to Death's realm herself had it not been for the Phoenix Force's intervention. Safe to say, this got Lady Death's attention, which led to the invitation. Contrary to popular belief, the existences at the peak of the omniverse did in fact have complaints and issues with the various multiverses and the universes they contained. Within the bar, Death took the form of a tall woman with bone-white skin and long ash-gray hair. She sat at a bar stool and wore an elegant black cloak that seemed to be woven from silk and shadow. Sitting at a table was Eternity, who appeared male, but had no distinguishable features other than his face. His bipedal silhouette contained stars and planets within its shimmering darkness. Sitting across from him was Infinity. She appeared as a gold woman of the same stature as Eternity, though slimmer in form with black markings and skin that rippled down like golden sand with the ever-flowing passage of time. Setting down her glass, Lady Death complained aloud with a firm voice that never lacked sophistication. Last week, those Beyonders of one of the multiverses killed every single molecule man of that multiverse at the same time. The Phoenix Force sat a seat away from Lady Death on another bar stool. In the presence of these beings had an appearance of a beautiful bipedal woman composed of elegantly flowing flames. Compared to the forms the other cosmic beings had taken, she was the shortest, but she didn't mind. She asked Lady Death, but why would they do that? If the multiverse ended, no life existed, so she didn't exist there and didn't know what happened. Eternity answered her in a low, gruff voice. They ensured this molecule man character had a power which existed at the heart of the universe, and when the man's existence was removed, it caused the collapse and obliteration of that universe. By doing so to all of them in that multiverse at the same time, it destroyed the whole multiverse in a single moment. The Phoenix Force became even more confused. But, why? Why would they commit such a senseless act of destruction? Infinity answered in a stoic yet feminine voice. They wanted to see what would happen if they did it. She downed another glass and motioned for Eternity to refill it. The Phoenix Force was rendered mute at the given answer. All entities called the Phoenix Force that existed in the various multiverses were her, but they were also individuals as well. She could connect to them and direct them at any point, but when not actively connecting to them, they would do their own thing. It was the same for all the other beings in this bar. Being both a single being and infinite beings simultaneously was not an easy thing, and it was easy to lose track of the infinite other selves when not actively connecting to them. The purpose of the bar was for the omnipresent beings to get together every once in a while and get drunk and get their complaints off their metaphorical chests. They'd often invite another being to give them a glimpse of the problems the higher-ups had and get better acquainted. Doing so allowed the omniverse to run much smoother, and it just so happened this time the Phoenix Force was invited. Getting drunk had a somewhat therapeutic effect on the infinite individuals, as they could more easily connect to their infinite selves while drunk and discuss the general and specific problems with everyone. The origin of the bar was an experimental challenge given to Eternity some unquantifiable time back to create a means for a cosmic being to get drunk. He succeeded in creating what he called eternal ale, alcoholic proof, infinity. The brewing process would start during the Big Bang and would finish fermenting right before the Great Collapse. It was a brew that took the lifetime of a universe to make, and he couldn't make much of it as only specific universes were born that even had the right conditions for the brewing. Once he accumulated enough of it though, he'd invite the other cosmic entities and they'd all get drunk. The omniverse benefited from the drunken complaining bonding time in odd ways, so it had continued ever since. Sitting on his own bar stool on the other side of Lady Death was the Living Tribunal. As a being with 3 differently covered veiled faces on 3 of the 4 sides of his head, he drank 3 times as much as the others to get each face had successfully drunk. He was in fact the most powerful of the assembled beings, and he too appreciated the occasional time given to wind down and complain with beings he did in fact consider friends and family. One of the Living Tribunal's faces, the partially covered one that had domain over vengeance within the omniverse, said with an unconcealed edge in its voice, "Those Beyonders. They think they can treat everything as they wish. It is but a game to them." The uncovered face rebutted in a slow slur, "They are a necessity to everything as a whole. As you know, that face had domain over necessity, so it was of course considered an expert on the subject." The last face, the one that was completely covered by a veil, said in a crisp-cut voice, "But after doing so, no price will have to be paid by them for such a transgression. Can this be tolerated?" The last face with domain over equity felt uncomfortable when things did not balance out, and it couldn't see anything on the other side of the scale when some beings annihilated a multiverse just to see what would happen. Death considered this for a moment and answered the arguing faces, "The price they must pay is that they will stay in an empty multiverse until the collapse of the omniverse. None of them shall be allowed to trespass another multiverse nor create one anew." Agreed, all 3 faces of the Living Tribunal simultaneously replied. Finishing her glass once more, Infinity said with irritation in her voice, beings like the Beyonders can only be punished once they have gone too far and only by their own actions. Eternity added, not just the Beyonders. The Celestials and the Norns of every multiverse treat the whole of it as their own playground to do with it as they please and play whatever games they wish, as if each universe didn't already have a game master. The Phoenix Force nodded after downing another glass of eternal ale. Even when using an avatar, she had never truly gotten drunk before, so this was a new experience. She knew of the Celestials and the Norns as she had many run-ins with them as well in various forms. The Celestials decided that the universe must progress in a direction of their choice, and they seeded and destroyed worlds as they pleased to further their decision. The Norns were the fate weavers and storytellers. They pretty much decided at birth whether or not someone would live a blessed life, a cursed one, or an ordinary one. They did not make the decisions for that person, of course, but they did arrange in advance the trials or lack thereof any given person would have to go through. If they were neutral, that would be fine, but they seemed to have their own agenda and their own interests, and more often than not they would interfere with the lives of others they felt got in the way of those interests. The flame-embodied woman said in a light yet drunken slur, "You know, if you really wanted to ruin their games, you could change the rules they are used to so they no longer apply." Lady Death gave an amused look to the embodiment of life and passion and said, "Oh? And how would such a feat be accomplished without throwing off the balance we ourselves are tasked with maintaining?" The Phoenix Force had many avatars in many multiverses and had experienced many things with many interesting people. As such, she had her own unique perspectives on such matters, and it took only a moment of drunken contemplation to think of something. She answered back, "Those Beyonders gave a person the purpose of destroying the universe on his death, right? If that kind of thing doesn't throw off the balance, then couldn't we do something like that? What if we gave a person powers which changed the rules of the game those guys force everyone to play by?" Death's amused look changed into a pondering smirk. She was actually the least affected by the eternal ale, but she still liked these occasional get-togethers as oddly enough, it made her feel alive. Ordinarily, she would pass on the Phoenix's suggestion. However, her somewhat drunken state allowed her easy access to herself in all multiverses, including a specific universe where a certain series of events crafted by the Norns was coming into play. It just so happened that she could hijack their carefully laid out plans and, with some items already in place along with some help, they might make something rather interesting. The other cosmic beings listened to the Phoenix Force's suggestion but didn't think much of it. It was not their place to interfere. That was until Lady Death spoke up. "I like it, but a test run would be prudent. I have a candidate in mind that would do well." She sent the information to each of the other beings. The Phoenix Force was quite surprised that the chosen candidate was in the very universe of the girl she had just saved. They were even on the same planet and about the same age. Death had also given the details of some of the things of that world they would have to work with and the events that would allow them to change a few things. The Living Tribunal passed his senses over the candidate and was a bit surprised. Not at how young he was. Age mattered little to him. The Living Tribunal was capable of simultaneously looking through other universes for the same person and could see their actions at many ages, so he was easily able to get a clear picture of the mortal's potential and future. What startled him was that should this candidate be similar to his parallel counterparts, even he, the Living Tribunal, judge, and jury of the Omniverse, would have no notable complaint. For a being with 3 separate personalities, having all 3 agree on a single thing was surprising. Eternity and Infinity looked at each other before nodding. They calculated out how much each could contribute without breaking the balance and how to set it so that their chosen would be both protected and formidable without being catered to or pampered. As each discussed what they could contribute, they realized the irony behind the form the power they were crafting had taken. They felt it really did balance out quite well. If those other beings of great powers thought this world was solely their game, it was time to introduce a new player. The power they crafted would turn the chosen into a video game character when granted, along with the timing of a specific event the chosen would soon go through. The concept of video games had been shared by Lady Death and the Phoenix Force, who both had more knowledge of mortal lives than the others. Eternity and Infinity's power would grant a game-like system that included a pause function and infinite inventory. The Living Tribunal's power would generate quests for the chosen to guide him to accomplish deeds that would go towards making that universe a better place. The Phoenix Force came up with the experience, level, and even a respawn system. She had more to work with as the granting of the power would occur with the awakening of the chosen's innate abilities, which could be directed by her. Lady Death's granted power would assist with the respawn system as well as grant a tutorial period for the chosen. She also intended on using some existing materials in that universe that were under her domain, 3 items in particular. They would be used to make sure the chosen's abilities and potential were rendered invisible to those beings of great power capable of seeing such things while keeping the chosen's powers flexible. On the 26th day of July of the year 2003, 9-year-old Harry Potter sat alone in a cupboard under the stairs of number 4, Privet Dr. There were many universes with a Harry Potter, but this one's time, as written by the Norns, was coming to an end. This Harry had discovered he could do magic when he really tried to, and a few years back, he had consciously started suppressing it. As far as he knew, suppressing it prevented accidents from happening which, although had not made his relatives treat him better, it had made sure they didn't treated him worse. Most of the time anyways. He already felt the pressure in his gut making him ache, but since there was an accident today that his relatives blamed on him, the cupboard he was in had a lock on it and he was unable to leave. His relatives, the Dursleys, were upstairs trying and failing to fix a game station Dudley had gotten for his birthday a month ago but had broken accidentally. Rather than admit the truth, he blamed Harry even though everyone knew Harry would never step foot into Dudley's room. Dudley was currently whining that Harry's aunt and uncle should buy him a new one. Harry doubted anyone cared that his own birthday was supposedly next week. What was strange however was that although Harry knew his relatives to be upstairs, he could have sworn he heard footsteps outside his cupboard door. At that thought, he realized how pathetic it was that he had considered the cupboard his. That was like saying the trash can belonged to the trash. This wasn't his space, it was just where they put him. Harry felt the pressure build up in his bones and they somehow felt worse than they did when they were broken. He decided to go for broke and asked softly to whoever might be there, "Hello, can I come out? I don't feel so good." A moment later Harry heard what could only be described as a woman sobbing. Was someone crying out there? Several sounds came and it seemed that there might have been several people on the other side of the door. The door jarred itself as it looked like someone was going to open it but then Harry heard a muffled, "Stupefy," followed by a heavy thump and someone saying, "You know the laws, the past cannot be changed, only observed. I'm sorry." The footsteps got further away towards the direction of the front door and Harry heard from the other side of his cupboard door someone say, "I'm sorry Mr. Potter. This is not what you deserve. But I promise you, you'll be in a better place soon." Harry could hear the bitter sadness behind the stranger's voice and wondered what that person meant. The members of the Department of Mysteries left after using a variety of spells through Harry's cupboard door and now knew the exact physical condition of the boy who lived as well as the details of the space he had been living in for the last 9 years. Every member of the group's heart ached, but when using time turners to determine the cause of an event, they were forbidden from stopping it, no matter how unjust or heartbreaking. Sometime after silence returned, Harry felt his body ache and crack. A moment later, Harry Potter exploded as he transmuted into a mass of semi-solid magic form. Had Harry been more powerful, he could have survived his initial Obscurus transformation. However, the blood wards which were placed to protect him from magicals who sought him with ill intent, had been draining his own magic reserves for years. They were supposed to be powered by love and would only use Harry's magic as a fuel source in a pinch, but not a single trace of love for Harry would be found in the home, forcing the blood wards to drain Harry's magic instead. There was a reason they were considered illegal. Harry actually would have become an Obscurial 2 years prior had it not been for the drain delaying his magic from going critical after years of being suppressed. The black ash that could not be seen by non-magicals quickly dissipated and with that, nothing was left of Harry Potter in this world. The assembled members of the Department of Mysteries watched without a single dry eye. They were a stoic profession but this tragedy was something that would have the entirety of Greater Magical Britain drowning in tears before the next sundown. What none of the watchers concerned themselves with was the fate of the Dursleys. The residence had been obliterated to the point nothing stood higher than a meter off the ground from what was once a 2-story building. No one would bother searching the wreckage for survivors. What was interesting was that the blood wards actually contained the explosion, preventing damage to the surrounding houses while amplifying it within the property line. The blood wards were of course examined thoroughly and would be documented for later review. After getting a few more readouts they left to the agreed upon location to wait until their originals had gone back in time before they could return and give their reports. Although the Departments of Mysteries employed those who sought answers to questions no one had ever answered, none of them were looking forward to giving the answers to the questions of what happened today to their fellow members. If possible, it might be better to put a lid on it, but they highly doubted that would be possible. Perhaps it would be for others, but not for Harry Potter. More than one had already determined a means to have it leak in a way that could not be traced back to them. They would not allow this matter to be swept under the rug. The almost 10-year-old boy himself, however, found that he was in a grassy plain. He no longer wore his cousin's oversized clothing but a plain white cotton shirt and tan pants. He even had shoes which both fit him and were comfortably tied. Before he could further question where he was, a familiar-looking black-haired man with glasses and a red-haired woman walked up to him and smiled. Without knowing why, Harry started crying as he could see real love in their eyes and unconsciously moved towards them. They rushed at him and embraced him into a hug. Harry didn't know how, but he knew these were his parents. No one said anything as each was crying. Ping. Harry lifted his head which had been buried into his father's shoulder and saw a floating display. Tutorial has begun. Time left for tutorial, 363 days, 20 hours, 16 minutes, 12 seconds. Press start. Although there was a timer, it did not move forward. Harry decided to ignore it for now and after crying some more in his parents' arms he fell asleep. Some time later he woke to a clear, beautiful sky and saw that his parents' faces were still there, looking at him. Harry softly asked, "Are you my mom and dad?" The redhead answered, "Yes sweetie, I'm Lily, and this is your father James." Harry asked, "Am I dead?" James smiled and answered back, "Yes my son, but once you are ready you're going back to life." Harry looked thoughtful for a moment before frowning. "But what if I don't want to return?" Lily looked like she was going to cry again before she pushed it down and answered him back, "Harry, I can promise you no matter what, you are never going back to my sisters again." Harry could hear the righteous fury behind his mother's words and his heart felt warm. No one had ever been angry for him before. James nodded and said, "Harry, you've been given a special gift. No one can force you to use it, but if you do, you will be able to see and experience wonderful things and do things others will speak of for generations to come. Harry looked back at the see-through screen with the frozen timer and said, "Is it that?" Lily nodded and said, "Yes, Harry. It's like a game, one of those that Dudley played. But instead of using a controller, you can play as you. If you click start, it will begin. If you pause it, you will find yourself back here. You can keep it paused as long as you want, my dear." Harry wasn't aware when Lily started petting his head, but he instantly liked it. He stayed like that for a while until he started speaking with his parents and they started talking to him, telling him of their lives and their friends and family. Harry knew he could do magic thanks to an epiphany he had years ago, which was why he became an Obscurial in the first place. One can't consciously suppress magic without awareness that it's there. What he didn't know, however, was that both his parents could use magic as well and went to a castle for their schooling. Lily reminded Harry that once he returned to life, he would be able to go to Hogwarts too. Lily and James told Harry everything about themselves and later started teaching him everything they could think of. Harry was a very smart child, otherwise he wouldn't have figured out he could do magic so early in life. Until this point he had to make himself look slow or his relatives would accuse him of cheating and punish him for getting better grades than Dudley. Now, however, he wanted to make his parents proud and put every effort into learning everything they were willing to teach him. Lily taught Harry math, English, literature, and the basic sciences. James taught Harry about magic, about the Potter family, and about many forms of history, both mundane and magical. Often the space they were in would change to a classroom and they pulled out books to read with Harry and wrote things on a blackboard to go over with Harry. Other times the space would turn into a living room with cable TV and a selection of his parents' favorite movies. The space could even change into a game room with an arcade and several game stations of various generations with many dozens of video games, both retro and new. For what may have been months, years, or even longer, Harry spent time with his mother and father, getting the childhood and love he always craved. Although he was not pressured into it, eventually the temptation had won out and Harry pressed the start button. The game had begun. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, Gearing Up. Harry had reached level 57 after a year of training in the tutorial and the timer was nearly at 0. The tutorial took place in a basic village where he could do basic quests and gain levels and get stronger, though not without danger or risks. Monsters in the area weren't easy to slay when the game had the quality of real life, and though he could return from death when killed, the process was indescribably painful. When he died he would lose a level, and if he died when he didn't have a level to lose, 5 days of tutorial time would be used up. When this first happened, Harry was made aware through a pop-up warning that revival when dying at level 1 was only possible in the tutorial and would lead to permanent death if this occurred after the tutorial was finished. During the tutorial, Harry's skinny, malnourished body changed to a full and healthy one and he gained visible muscles from running around and swinging a sword. For 3 months a drill instructor-like trainer in the village had him doing all kinds of things while feeding him fruits and such. Day by day his body healed and filled out at a visible rate and his malnourished form morphed into a high-performance one in less time than should have been possible were it not for his gamer's body. According to the FAQ part of the menu which came with his gift, his gamer's body was gained through the combination of becoming an Obscurus and awakening a mutation at the same time along with some help. Harry asked his parents about this and his father informed him what an Obscurial was while his mother informed him what a mutant was. A normal Obscurial could shift back and forth between an Obscurus form and a normal form. Though historically the ability to control the transformation and the form were both questionable as all Obscurials were inherently unstable and almost guaranteed to die. Harry's body, however, was incapable of taking on the Obscurus form of a flying mass of semi-solid magic particles that could exude tremendous force and was nearly unstoppable. A mutant was someone who would, often through great stress or trauma, gain an attribute, trait, or power outside of the norm that they were not born with. His mother, however, told him there had never been a mutant wizard. She said that wizards were hardier and the amount of stress needed to awaken a mutation was not something that a wizard could survive. Harry was likely not the first wizard to be subjected to enough stress to kill him but come back to life, but the gene needed for a mutation to activate was not common, so Harry lucked out. His mother and father concluded after many tests they walked Harry through that his mutation allowed the traits of an Obscurial to fuse into his human form rather than have them set into an alternate highly unstable form. Because of this, though his body appeared to be a bundle of organs inside a skeleton wrapped in muscle and skin, it only looked that way. His actual existence was composed of black ash-like particles of semi-solid magic energy that came together and took a form that imitated the cells of Harry's body. When observed, you couldn't even tell there was anything special about the cells until they broke down. It was a flawless imitation. What was special about this type of existence was that the amount of Obscurus particles that composed each cell was greater than the minimum required to imitate a cell. Should Harry's body receive damage, the excess particles of the body would be able to change form and take the place of the damaged cells. Moreover, as the damaged cells were just imitations of cells and not actual cells, the damaged cells would recover after a period. Truly harming Harry's form was like punching sand. However, if Harry's body accumulated enough damage to exceed the excess of particles he had to replace the damage with, aka his damage tolerance or total health, the integrity of his body would break down and dissolve completely into Obscurus particles and reform later at a lower density. Both processes were intolerably painful. In other words, Harry's body was like a video game character's. Damage he took basically decreased his health bar without decreasing his physical abilities, and if he took too much damage and died, he respawned later at a lower level. His level itself seemed to be the concentration or density of the Obscurus particles, and there were many things Harry could do to increase his level. At higher levels Harry's damage tolerance would be higher as well. Of course at a higher level his cells would contain more particles to imitate the cells, so when he did take damage it was more severe. This meant that the amount of health he lost if someone was strong enough to damage him increased as his own health increased along with his defense. So getting stabbed at any level removed about the same percentage of health, but he was much harder to stab at higher levels. The main source of Harry's level UPS had been defeating monsters that roamed around the tutorial village. Whenever a monster died, it dissolved into particles of grey light which was considered death energy, and Harry could absorb them. Once he absorbed enough energy to reach a specific threshold, Harry's level increased. The FAQ stated that when Harry leveled up, his Obscurus particles would replicate themselves using the external energy they had absorbed. However, the Obscurus particles he was composed of could not absorb just any energy. The energy he absorbed had to be dominated first. The monsters around the village were composed of energy of the afterlife, and defeating them was what allowed Harry to absorb them in a way that his Obscurus particles could replicate themselves. Of course this meant that Harry had to actually fight them. Combat in the tutorial village had a steep learning curve for someone who never had muscles before, but his Spartan-style trainer, someone who did not look like he belonged in a small rural village, said that was a good thing since it meant Harry didn't have any bad habits he needed to beat out of him. The village trainer showed Harry how to use a short sword and round shield and didn't bother questioning why a 10-year-old child was learning how to fight monsters. And while the trainer taught Harry physical combat, and the meaning of the word sadist, his mother and father taught him the finer points of magic-based combat. This was useful as the timer didn't move while paused, but Harry's stamina and magic reserves wouldn't restore themselves while paused, so if Harry exercised till he couldn't move and cast spells until he was out of magic then paused for a week, for that entire week he would still be so weak he couldn't move, which sucked. Thanks to that he couldn't abuse the pause function to grind his physique or practice magic, though he did become an expert in theoretical situations. Although that made sense, it still bugged Harry to no end. With his game-like body, Harry had the stats of wisdom, intelligence, strength, agility, and luck. Each did as their game equivalent did. Wisdom increased his magic restoration speed, made magic easier and faster to cast, decreased magic damage taken when attacked, and made Harry more clever. Intelligence increased his internal magic reserves, made the effects of cast magic stronger, and gave him better memory and faster thinking speed. Strength increased how much he could lift, how much force he could put behind a physical blow, how long he could fight without stopping, and also reduced how much physical damage he took when attacked, better than a level up did on its own. Agility increased his movement speed along with his reaction time and dodge rate. And luck of course increased luck. When Harry increased in level he was able to gain 5 stat points he could distribute as he pleased, but he was warned against the stockpiling of luck. Luck apparently affected real-world chance and probability in a way that was hard to avoid. It didn't just increase his odds of winning at casinos, it increased the likelihood that opportunities which brought danger would be forced on him. Harry decided to stick with an average person's level of luck and not distribute anything to it, but that was not the only way to increase his stats points. When Harry first saw his stat page, the stats were abysmal. Not that surprising of course, as a skinny 9-year-old twig a week before his 10th birthday. The village trainer practically dragged him to the training arena and took it upon himself to put Harry through his paces until Harry's strength and agility had both reached 10. Because his stamina didn't recover while paused, he could only spend real time exercising, but the benefits were worth it as it added stats to Harry's body without leveling up. One thing Harry did abuse of the pause function was that he could spend as long as he wanted to study with his parents, thus increasing his wisdom and intelligence almost for free, though he definitely spent more time playing video games and watching TV with his parents than he did studying. Once Harry's wisdom and intellect both increased by 30 additional stats, it didn't move any higher and his parents couldn't think of anything else to teach him as no more books appeared in the classroom they could use. That in itself was fine, but the TV only showed reruns which he eventually grew tired of, and you can only beat an old video game so many times before it is no longer enjoyable. And although Harry was level 57, he could fight monsters that were level 70 or so thanks to his bonus stats. Harry spent far more time increasing his base stats through exercise and studying and increasing his path mastery than he did grinding levels. The reason was simple. When the tutorial was over, his level would return to 1, but the stats he added through exercise, study, and practice would remain, so Harry would not return to Earth with a twig body again. The fact that he wouldn't lose his paths was also something to celebrate. This game didn't have specific skills and proficiency towards those skills. Instead, each skill was grouped into a path, and as the path rank increased, so did the effect of the skills contained without. Each path had 100 ranks and Harry had made progress on 3 paths. His magic path was at rank 12, his warrior path was at rank 4, and his scholar path was also at rank 4. The magic path strengthened magic of course, but Harry was surprised that he was only rank 12. Although he lacked in practice, Harry still memorized the method and mastered the spell theory of every spell Hogwarts taught, and he practiced up to the 3rd year spells. By that ranking, Harry doubted that this Dumbledore character he heard about's magic path rank was higher than 30. Of course, rank did not represent percentage. It was in fact geometric, much like the Richter scale used in earthquakes. Rank 20 was 10 times stronger than rank 10, and so on. Harry gave his heartfelt goodbyes to his parents before unpausing for the last time here. It would have involved more tears, but Harry figured out some time ago that the Lily and James Potter here weren't his parents, they were echoes. Lily and James Potter probably reincarnated long ago. Harry didn't think the echoes were aware of it, and honestly he didn't mind, as even if it was just a simulation, it gave him a childhood filled with love and everything he ever wanted. 10-year-old Harry appeared at a park he somewhat recognized as one close to where he used to live. The sun was just beginning to rise and the park was empty of anyone there to see how he arrived. Tutorial complete. Enjoy your new life. Harry opened up his stats menu to see his level 1 stats and inventory. He was pleased that the former was not as bad as he thought it might have been, but that sadistic trainer did put him through the ringer and his body certainly wasn't normal anymore. Harry Potter. Level 1 Age 10. STR 32 AGI 36. In 38 WIS 34. Luck 10. Warrior Path Rank 4. Scholar Path Rank 4. Magic Path Rank 12. His dad told him many times to hide as much about his new abilities as possible, so the fact that someone a week from their 11th birthday was 3 times stronger and smarter than an average adult was something that he would have to be discreet about. Harry's inventory included his current clothes, which matched what he wore before. A plain white shirt and tan pants which still fit him though he had grown several inches since his death. He also no longer needed glasses, which was something he was thankful for. Out of curiosity, Harry used the pause feature and found the world silent, grey, and frozen. Harry was able to move around, but only a few feet from what he was. Anything he touched felt like cold stone, so it was not very comfortable. When he unpaused, he found himself back where he was when he paused, though he had moved while the pause was in effect. Harry paused again and opened his inventory. He noticed earlier there was something else in there. According to the see-through display that his inventory took the form of, he had about 300 British pounds, the local currency, and a small present icon in one of the inventory slots. Harry tapped on it, which caused it to vanish, and 2 inventory slots filled out. One contained a letter and the other contained a train ticket. The inventory content, however, felt different from what he expected. In the game, items and such were simple things, and when Harry placed them in his inventory, he got the details about them, such as weight, length, balance, and quality and such. He didn't need to read those details, he simply knew them. His inventory wasn't available when pausing in the tutorial, as during the tutorial, pausing caused him to be with his parents, so he never placed any of the books Lily and James taught him in his inventory, so he had no idea what was happening now was a feature. Although Harry had not taken the letter out of his inventory, he knew the exact contents as if it was memorized. He even knew the texture of the paper even though he hadn't touched it yet. Harry couldn't take the letter out while paused, so he unpaused and took out the letter, and the content he seemed to have memorized vanished, though he did remember what he went over. As a test, Harry placed the letter back into his inventory, and once more, he seemed to have memorized it. Harry went over the content of the letter a few times and removed it again. Though he no longer knew the exact details, what he went over was still retained. Although Harry couldn't place and remove things from his inventory while paused, this was still the ultimate cheat for studying and knowledge retention, because he could take as long as he wanted to memorize a book while paused. Ping int +1. Harry smirked at the familiar ping in realization he could still gain bonus stats after the tutorial. Yes, Harry had some ideas to try out now. Then of course there was the letter itself. It was his Hogwarts acceptance letter and was actually dated for the next week and included all the required school supplies he would need for his first year. His mother told him that Hogwarts letters for first years were always mailed out on their 11th birthday, and somehow Harry got his a week early. He even got the train ticket that should only have been mailed to him after he mailed his response to the admission letter. Not that he was going to complain about it. The game system included a map that Harry was able to zoom in and out of, and although it was grayed out past a certain point, the whole of Surrey was highlighted and the places of interest were marked. Harry quickly made his way to the bus station. Harry wasn't sure how to describe it, but the normal world felt weird. Well, perhaps not weird. Boring? Something like that. Harry kinda missed the sky of that tutorial world where he would occasionally see gigantic things flying higher than mountains, soaring from one end of the horizon to the other. They never descended near the village, but their silhouettes could be made out from their massive forms. Flying leviathans with multiple sets of wings. Massive flocks of enormous birds capable of blocking out the sun. Illusionary beasts that radiated color and left a rainbow-like trail as they flew off. Yes, the normal world was boring, or maybe it was just the suburban area. Hopefully it was just that. Harry was questioned by the ticket vendor at the bus station why a minor was going to London, but Harry told him he spent the night with a friend who had an emergency and couldn't get him home, so he gave him money and dropped him off at the station. Harry's mother didn't appreciate that his father insisted on teaching Harry how to come up with a believable lie on the spot, but Lily had no way to deny its usefulness as long as it was not abused. The fact that his mother loved to watch crime dramas that demonstrated all sorts of lying skills didn't help her argument. He took a bus to London, and once his map filled out he headed from the station to the Leaky Cauldron. Before entering he cast the most overpowered spell his parents could think of teaching him, the Notice Me Not. The Notice Me Not charm was a 7th year spell and one of the few that his parents insisted on Harry mastering before the end of the tutorial. It was the same spell that prevented non-magicals from noticing people walking into platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station and was picky with how it was cast. The spell only allowed you to prevent people from noticing one specific thing, and the more specific it was, the longer it lasted. like people walking into and vanishing into a brick wall. Harry cast it on himself with the intention to prevent people from noticing his black hair color. People still saw him entering, and if they wanted to speak with him there was nothing to stop them. But if seen, it wouldn't register in their minds that he had black hair, and if asked to describe him later they wouldn't remember what color his hair was. Harry's mother insisted Harry learn this, as Harry looked much like James did at that age, and she didn't feel comfortable that people might recognize him before he could prepare himself. Harry once tried the Notice Me Not while grinding monsters to prevent them from noticing his presence, but Harry learned the hard way that wasn't how the spell worked. The best Harry could do was prevent monsters from noticing Harry was not a monster. And even that didn't work very often, as many monsters would attack each other. Also, the stronger the magic of those who are prevented from noticing, the quicker the spell ran out and needed to be recast. There was no way, for example, to use it for longer than a few seconds against a powerful wizard, and it would only last a minute or so on a seasoned Auror according to Harry's dad, and even less on groups of Aurors. Luckily the pub was filled with average wizards and not Aurors. No one was specifically looking for him, so a quick glance was as much if not more than most would give. This many magicals though, and Harry would need to recast it soon, but Harry had enough magic to cast it 3 times thanks to his bolstered stats even at level 1. Harry made his way to the back and tapped on the bricks his dad told him about, which opened up the wall to Diagon Alley. The alley itself did remind Harry a little of the village in that every building had its own unique aspects, but it seemed as if they cared about the wrong details. Was it impressive that a building could lean further than should be structurally possible without falling over because it was held up by magic? Not really, to be honest. Harry recast the Notice Me Not charm just as it was flickering out and hurried down the cobblestone street to where his dad said Gringotts was located. The fact that a structure called the Wizard Bank was run entirely by goblins was a point Harry felt might have been lost on most wizards. Then again, if they called it the Goblin Bank, Harry doubted they would have as much usage in the alley. The Notice Me Not charm fizzled out the moment Harry stepped into the bank, showing that many beings whose attention could not be avoided were staring at him. Harry didn't bother reapplying the charm. He simply walked up to an empty counter and said, "I'd like to speak with my account manager Rockshear." The goblin leaned over to look down on Harry and said, "And what account would that be?" Harry gave a flat look and answered back, "One of Rockshear's." "That's all you need to know." Harry's dad told him that talking to a goblin was like speaking to a tiger. Never let them see your back and show no weakness that gives them a reason to pounce. The goblin took no offense and called a runner. He told Harry, "Follow Deeptooth here and Rockshear will meet you soon." Harry gave a barely noticeable nod before following the other goblin to a waiting area. It did not take long for another, much older goblin to come forth. Harry expected that on habit, goblins would force wizards to wait some time before getting to them, but Harry was different, as the goblins had some expectations onto his identity and would not exercise patience in acquiring the answer just to stick it to an unknown wizard. Rockshear looked over Harry for a moment before irritably stating, "I am Rockshear. There are but 2 accounts handled by me and both are considered dead." Harry smiled, "A mistake, I'm certain. I'm Harry Potter." Rockshear narrowed his eyes and said, "We shall see. Follow me." Harry followed the goblin through a series of hallways to his office, where there was already a parchment on the table and a knife. The goblin held out the knife and said, "This blade will draw only a few drops of blood. Cut into your finger and let the blood fall on this parchment. If your claim is true, this will give proof. If not..." The goblin gave a toothy sneer. It seemed he did not appreciate the possibility of someone pretending to be Harry Potter. Harry nicked his finger and a few drops of blood fell. Harry could still bleed when injured, but the actual drops of blood would return to magic particles after a few minutes. Before that point, however, they were still drops of his blood and would act like it. The parchment the drops fell upon filled out with strange patterns and words Harry did not recognize. The goblin reviewed the words and patterns for a few moments before saying, "Congratulations on returning from the dead, Mr. Potter. Gringotts has no prejudice against mutants." Harry frowned and asked, "That paper shows you I'm a mutant." The goblin nodded and placed the paper over a candle, setting it ablaze. He calmly answered back, "It does, though the nature of the mutation cannot be inferred through this means, as we have no precedent before yourself. You are the first mutant wizard my kind has come across, though. I shall assume the nature of your mutation relates to the source of your unlikely revival from a failed obscurial transformation. It matters not. The fact that you are indeed Harry Potter and currently alive is all that Gringotts is concerned with." Harry asked, "Why does it sound like everyone knows about my death?" Rockshear commented back, "You have not stepped foot into the magical world since that day, have you? Very well, I shall give you your answer. The events of that night 12 months ago were felt throughout Greater Magical Britain. The Minister of Magic ordered the Department of Mysteries to send a group of unspeakables to investigate, using time turners to go back and determine what happened. They learned that Harry Potter had grown up in an abusive household and had died while transforming into an obscurial. Originally the minister tried to silence the news, but word got out and the next day everyone knew that Harry Potter had lived in an abusive household and was dead." He opened a drawer and shuffled out a few pieces of paper. He took one and said, "And although recently dead, your family's assets remain yours. Many daughters of the Potter line were wed out and many families share your blood, and all of them have been trying to inherit your family's assets. As there was no will, Gringotts' policy is to wait 2 years for any and all contenders to come forward, and the one with the closest blood relations would inherit. As you have returned, that is no longer necessary." Harry ignored the last part and was deep in thought. He remembered those people standing outside his door the night before his death, which always wonder about. That being said, he was now more confused. His parents' knowledge of events after their death only included things Harry knew. His father did ask him to check on Sirius Black, as the man had not died and was Harry's godfather, so the echo of James Potter asked Harry to check on him once he returned. Harry said, "This is my first time in the wizarding world, and everything I know of it I learned from a letter I found written by my father." This was a part of a cover story James and Harry had come up with to account for all the things they would let other people know that Harry knew without revealing the impossible truth. That being said, it hadn't taken into account Harry's fame. Harry questioned, "Why would my death matter to the world?" Rockshear pondered the question and decided to answer the best he could. "From the wizard's perspective, you are responsible for ending the reign of Voldemort. You know of him, don't you?" Harry nodded. "His parents did tell him loads about that blighted bastard." Rockshear continued, "You were taken to St. Mungo's once found after your parents were killed, and they found that you were hit with the killing curse, something that no one survives but you did somehow. It was guessed that Voldemort killed your parents and used the curse on you, something prevented it from working, and somehow the man hasn't been seen since. Many wizards hope he has died, though there is little conclusive evidence to support that. You were given the moniker Boy Who Lived and treated as a hero by wizards, even though you personally couldn't have done anything as a 15-month-old child, and no one actually has any real idea of what happened that night outside of mostly wild and a few educated guesses." Harry looked at Rockshear for a few moments to see if the goblin had been joking. When the serious expression didn't break up into laughter, Harry realized Rockshear had been serious, and Harry suddenly felt that the wizarding world might not be all it's cracked up to be. Harry asked a few more questions, such as why he was taken to his relatives, and told about the blood wards set up by Dumbledore. As long as Harry was near a relative of Lily's, the wards would protect him from any magical being seeking him with ill intent. It was revealed in a public hearing later that Dumbledore never took into account the possibility that one's blood relation would treat another as anything but family. Harry was not left there with ill intent, but it was considered neglect, as Harry was never checked on and his situation was assumed to be healthy. Dumbledore resigned from his post as Chief Warlock and Supreme Mugwump afterwards once he realized how blind he had been. Harry didn't like the man, but honestly couldn't hate him. He certainly would have felt different if things had not turned out the way they had, but for now he would at least give the old man the benefit of the doubt. Harry settled the remaining matters with Rockshear and took possession of the Potter Manor on High Rock in the north. Harry's father told him during the war the spell to hide it couldn't be used unless it was empty, and it contained the Potter family library. Harry had no intention of letting that go to waste. Harry acquired a moderate-sized bag of gold and purchased from the goblins a necklace that would cast a simple glamour that changed the color of his hair from black to dirty blonde. Harry's lightning bolt-shaped scar had started healing during the tutorial and was not noticeable without looking closely. Without the scar, his glasses, or black hair, Harry felt he should be able to safely move around Diagon Alley, though Rockshear did mention that Ollivander the Wandmaker would likely recognize him. After settling a few more matters, Harry asked, "What of my godfather, Sirius Black?" Rockshear scowled and said, "Lord Black remains imprisoned in Azkaban for these last 10 years. What? Why is he there, and how is he a lord?" Rockshear answered, "They say he was the secret keeper of your parents' home in Godric's Hollow and the right-hand man of Voldemort. It is also said that he killed Peter Pettigrew and 13 muggles, though he has never been formally charged and no trial has taken place for him. As for the lordship, it was only recently that his mother, father, and grandfather died, and with his other siblings and cousins dead or incarcerated after legitimate trials, lordship has fallen to Sirius Black." Harry held his face in horror at the realization of what the man had gone through. He said, "My parents' secret keeper was Peter Pettigrew. How can we get Sirius out?" Rockshear shook his head and answered, "It would not be simple. Pettigrew has been posthumously given an Order of Merlin 3rd class. Without incontrovertible evidence, there is little that can be done. I believe gold has been spent by Death Eaters aware of your godfather's innocence to prevent his matter from going to trial. Should Sirius Black die in Azkaban, the Black family properties and vault shall be inherited by Draco Malfoy after 2 years. He is the son of a known Death Eater and the closest male by blood of the Black family." Harry sighed at all the information that didn't make sense and directly asked, "If someone is a known Death Eater, how are they not in Azkaban? They claimed to be under the Imperious Curse during their own trials," he answered in a flat tone. Harry shook his head and asked, "Anything else you think I should know?" The goblin gave it some thought and said, "Dumbledore and the whole of Greater Magical Britain looked quite terrible after your death, so rumor has it they are going to do something big and stupid to make up for it. No word on what it is yet, but expect the unexpected." Harry thought that sounded foreboding but hoped nothing would come of it. He was still level 1 after all. The final matter he got to, which his mother insisted on, was getting himself a non-magical identity and background to be used should he leave the magical world. Both his parents agreed it was too small for Harry to stay in forever. Although he could arrange for such things later, the earlier it was made, the better it looked. Luckily, Harry was born in a mundane hospital and at least until a year ago went to a mundane school. Harry asked the goblins to set up his non-magical identity, showing he was placed in the system after his relatives died, and became a genius shortly thereafter and was enrolled into a high-end self-paced school. Harry watched enough crime dramas to know that suspicious people always had their past looked up, and Harry wanted something for others to find that was independent of magic and looked as normal as possible for his circumstances. Once finished, Harry put on the necklace, turning his hair dirty blonde, and left the bank. Ping. First quest. Acquire class materials. Acquire books from all 7 years. Acquire a full set of potions ingredients. Acquired high-quality potion crafting equipment. Acquire 4 sets of quality robes. Acquire false wand. Acquire special familiar. Harry had to do a double take when he saw items 5 and 6. He did wonder how he was going to do the wand thing, as he never needed one. Turns out even the quest was saying he didn't need one, but better to pretend he did. The special familiar was also interesting. Would he get a phoenix or perhaps a fairy dragon? Maybe some rare and obscure mythical beast? Harry selected the first item on the quest, and his map tagged the area and led him to a store called Flourish and Blots. From what Harry understood, most subjects used the same book over several years, so he needed only a few for each class. Magic books were among those his parents could not produce in the classroom they taught him in, but they did tell him what they remembered. Thanks to that, Harry was able to get all the books they spoke of and a few others they recommended, such as Mist Potent Potions. It could be found in the Hogwarts restricted section but could also be purchased from the bookstore, though it was far more expensive than standard books. Harry was quite pleased that none of the bookstore employees questioned why he needed so many books. Once a check mark was next to the quest item and all of the books were in Harry's inventory, Harry followed the map to one of the apothecaries and purchased a fair amount of each ingredient and 2 cauldrons, one for class and the better one for personal use, as the admissions letter specified the one for class needed to be pewter. Once Harry had finished getting each ingredient, his map marker changed to a location further down the alley to get the remaining ingredients he needed. Harry made his way through the shiftier part of Diagon called Nocturne Alley and found another apothecary, this one a bit shoddier, but as Harry was only buying ingredients that were considered legal if uncommon, the owner didn't make a fuss about it. Another check mark down. Next stop was the robe shop marked on his map called Twilfit and Tattings, which looked far more humble compared to the one he passed called Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions. Harry guessed this one had better quality though, since his map led him here instead. The seamstress was surprised to see a young child on his own requesting several sets of robes, as even rich purebloods wouldn't buy their children's Hogwarts apparel here. Her hesitation vanished of course when Harry showed her he had the coin needed. She started measuring him up and deciding on colors to match his eyes and hair, but Harry told her he would be changing his hair color to black for family reasons later, which she luckily didn't question. She did subtly ask if he wished for his family crest to be sewn into the robe though. The question indirectly asked if Harry was a pureblood, as Twilfit and Tattings catered more towards purebloods than it did others. Harry thought about it and asked if that was allowed for school robes before deciding against it. Since Harry hadn't denied having a house crest, the seamstress let the point drop and finished her measurements. Harry left the shop more than a little surprised that it had taken 2 hours and that the robes had cost more than all his ingredients and potion supplies put together, but the robes did look nice. The seamstress was silently pleased with herself as she noticed Harry had a well-developed form for a child, and she lessened some of the usual slack in the robes to better give an outline of Harry's physique when he wore them. She wondered if her customer would have a girlfriend before Christmas time. Harry's next map blip for the fake wand led him to a broom shop where Harry picked up on what he needed and purchased some pieces of wood. He used a carving spell to round and narrow the wood and used some sandpaper and polish he bought from the broom shop to finish it up until it had a nice sheen. A check mark appeared next to fake wand, and with some anticipation, Harry followed the map to the last check mark, the special familiar. Harry found 2 shops next to each other, Ellipse Owl Emporium and Magical Menagerie. His quest tag led him into the latter. The shop was filled with wall-to-wall cages, and only about a third of them were filled with creatures Harry somewhat recognized. Wait, scratch that, a fourth. That turtle's shell was covered in jewels, so not a normal turtle. Harry looked around in anticipation and followed the map mark to the cage containing his target. It was an orange female tabby cat. Harry quizzically stared at the cat as if daring it to be more interesting, but she simply sat there and stared back. Harry backed away and walked around the store a bit more, but the map was definitely pointing at the cat. That being said, the other animals didn't look that interesting. Sure, there were crabs that set themselves on fire, rabbits that transformed into top hats, and every type of bird and snake imaginable. But Harry didn't look twice at them compared to the orange cat. Besides, it was a good-looking cat. Harry asked the shop owner, anything special about that cat? The man looked over at the tabby and said, the orange one in the corner? No, it's just a cat. We got some Neasels and half Neasels if you want. Frightfully clever and loyal. Keen to sniff out suspicious things, Neasels are? Harry asked, then why do you have that orange one up for sale? The Magical Menagerie employee answered back, well, we got tricked, truth be told. Thought it was some rare breed or hybrid. Heard some strange rumors told by the one who sold it, but I've never seen anything odd about it. If you're really interested, I'll sell it to you cheap. She used to spend time with another orange cat, an old half-Neasel one. But some family bought it last month, so this girl has been a bit lonely. Harry went over to the cat and said, you want to come home with me? The orange tabby looked him in the eye for a moment and meowed and lifted her paw, scratching lightly the cage she was in. Harry smiled and opened the cage. The cat was calm as Harry picked her up and brought her over to the desk, where the cat got down on its belly and waited for Harry to finish. Harry thought it was a very chill cat and liked her even more. The advertisement for Ginger and Tabby cats was 9 galleons, but the employee sold her to Harry for 7, which Harry thanked him for. Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Jack of all trades. After receiving the pop-up, Harry felt a connection to the new cat, or Flurkin as she was apparently called. Harry was more than a little concerned since he had every textbook Hogwarts required on magic beasts and Flurkin was not listed in any of them. Through the connection he felt Goose's intention, which of course translated to "carry me human." Harry had to stifle a smile at that one. If given a human voice, Harry imaged it would be that of a upper society middle-aged woman. He purchased a nice carrier for Goose, who easily entered thinking, acceptable, for now. With that, Harry had finished his shopping for school supplies. Harry was tempted to get some ice cream at that place across from Gringotts, but he didn't want to push his luck. Harry instead lifted Goose's carrier and returned to the Leaky Cauldron and headed for London. Once back among the streets of the mundane, Harry realized he didn't really have much to do for the next 5.5 weeks besides put the entire Potter library into his inventory. Ping. New quest, Jack of all trades. Acquire 4 different paths. Get each of the 4 paths to rank 5. Harry raised an eyebrow before shrugging in acceptance. That worked. His scholar and warrior paths were both pretty close to rank 5 and he had confidence in getting them up soon. A 4th path, however, would be tricky. He actually had no ideas what paths were possible. Crafter was probably a path, but getting that to level 5 in a month wasn't likely. There was probably a path for businessmen, but he'd have to make a lot of money really fast to level that one up. Might be possible, but he hoped for something better. While Harry was standing there, someone bumped into him and said, "Watch it, kid." Harry looked up and was about to ask where the man's own eyes were, but noticed him talking to himself. No, he was talking on a phone, one of those hand ones his uncle said he wanted. Harry wondered what would happen if he put something like that into his inventory. Goose meowed with the intention, "Feed me?" Harry looked down and said, "What would you like?" Goose meowed and thought back, "Chicken." Harry thought the cat/Flurkin might be surprised that Harry was responding to it, but it seemed to this cat that this was nothing out of the ordinary. Kinda made Harry wonder what was out of the ordinary to her. Harry opened his map and found a grocery store a few blocks down and headed that direction. Harry still had most of the £300 minus the bus fare he started with, so getting cat food wouldn't be an issue. At this thought, Harry realized something very odd. He wasn't hungry. His stomach felt empty, which was why he thought of ice cream earlier, sure, but the pain of hunger wasn't there. He figured he would address that after feeding his Flurkin. The store did in fact sell cat food and Harry was happy he found the kind made with real chicken. After purchasing a bunch of it along with a month worth of other flavors, Harry entered an alleyway free of witnesses and subtly conjured a plate. Conjuration was something he practiced more than any other discipline, as he would often conjure weapons and shields while fighting monsters, so conjuring a plate wasn't an issue. He opened the food and set it on the plate before letting Goose out and saying, "Here you go, Goose." Goose meowed as she approached the food and conveyed through the bond, "Well done, human," before chowing down. Harry looked through his map of London while Goose finished eating. Those electronics were interesting. From how his mother described them, they were like Muggle magic, only more easily explained. If non-magicals could learn it, Harry figured he could too. On the map he saw a larger store he hoped would sell a few pieces of electronics and decided to head there next. 4 hours, 2 outlet stores, a trip back to Gringotts, and 2 bookstores later, Harry had what he needed and a headache. The first store that he asked for electronics at, he found that they had large things like TVs and small things like phones and lots of computers, most of which was outside Harry's price range, so he had to return to Gringotts and get some of his galleons exchanged into British pounds. Harry then returned but went to a different outlet store that he heard had a better variety. Harry purchased a simple calculator, an expensive calculator, and something called a BlackBerry. After his purchase, Harry placed them all into his inventory and found another problem. Harry could now tell exactly how each piece was put together and the number of screws within, and could even tell what information was stored within. The problem was that he still didn't know how any of it worked. The programming language was not one he knew, so he had to find a bookstore, which then directed him to another bookstore to buy a dozen books on the subject. What gave him a headache was that even after getting the books into his inventory, he still didn't know how the electronics worked. Sure, he could list off the contents of the books verbatim, but that didn't mean he understood it. It was like buying a book written in French then buying a book on French to English translation. Having both didn't immediately mean he could read the first book, as there was no automated cross-referencing. Harry sighed at how badly he underestimated the work needed to learn a new skill. He felt he could still do it, but he would have to do it consciously and not assume it would happen automatically for him. Once ready, Harry said to Goose, "We're heading home, but the ride won't be comfortable." Goose, who had been pleased to be chauffeured around the city after being in a cage for some time for some reason, expressed a sense of disbelief at Harry's comment. Something on the line of, "Oh really?" Harry initiated the portkaya that Rockshear gave him, which made him feel like he was being dragged by his belly button through a tornado at 200 kilometers an hour. When Harry saw the ground again, he set a stance and landed all right. He figured if he hadn't trained in martial forms he'd have landed on his butt. James had told him it would be uncomfortable, but Harry didn't feel too bad. He chalked it up to his gamer's body. Harry looked at Goose and said, "You all right?" Goose appeared completely unshaken and quite clearly conveyed back, "You've obviously never traveled by turning yourself inside out before." At that, Harry had to question whether or not his interpretation of Goose's messages were accurate. What kind of travel requires turning yourself inside out? Harry looked around the area that was his new home. It was a high-rise cliff face overlooking the sea. There was actually a break in the cliff face behind him which prevented this section from being approached on foot without advanced means. Harry took the ward key from his inventory and activated it. A moment later the empty space revealed a two-story Victorian-style house. Harry said, "This will be our new home for the next month, Goose." Goose seemed non-committal about it. Like she'd seen better but had seen worse as well. The house itself had a welcoming room, a living room with a fireplace, a dining room, a kitchen, and the downstairs had a guest room. The upstairs had the master bedroom and 3 other bedrooms along with the library and several bathrooms of course. Harry went to the kitchen first and conjured a litter box and sand along with a plate and bowl. He used a weak water summoning charm to fill the bowl before letting Goose out and saying, "I'm going to look upstairs." Goose started drinking and Harry headed up to check the library. He was not disappointed as it had 7 bookshelves lining the walls with 6 rows of books each, all of which were full. One by one each was removed from the shelf and placed into his inventory. Contained within were family spells, historical events, alliances, and of course a highly detailed genealogical record. What surprised Harry and made him realize he would need to return to the bookstore later was the lack of an encyclopedia or dictionary. Harry returned to the living room and used a small incendio charm to ignite the fireplace before he sat on the comfy chair nearby. Harry was looking into space as his mind was actively going over the tech books he bought. He was tempted to pause but he couldn't feel the warmth of the fireplace when time stopped, and if he paused he might be tempted to stay paused until he mastered everything, which was not a good idea. He needed to acclimate himself to a proper day and night cycles after all. His cross-referencing was interrupted by a warm fuzzball jumping onto his lap. After laying down Harry heard Goose send the question, "Do you not eat?" Harry realized only then he had in fact forgotten to buy any food for himself during the whole day. That wasn't healthy, was it? Ping. FAQ updated. Food and sleep. Your body can sustain itself on ambient energy and does not require sleep or nourishment. When injured or depleted of health, stamina, or magic reserves, eating and drinking can directly restore reserves or increase the rate of recovering. Sleeping can be initiated in a sleep environment and will automatically restore all depleted reserves after 4 hours if uninterrupted. After reading the conveniently timed pop-up, Harry answered Goose back, "I can eat but I don't need to. I'm not a normal human." Goose shifted to get more comfortable and conveyed through the link, "If you're a normal human then I'm a normal house cat," as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Harry started petting Goose as he went back to learning the mysteries of a calculator. The fact that a calculator calculates base 10 math yet the programming seemed to be based off the number 8 was harder to work through than he thought. He was glad that his 3 times higher than an average adult stats seemed to let his mind brute force his way through the required comprehensions. It was about morning the next day he finally got what he was looking for. Ping. Tech path has risen to rank 1. Harry gave a content sigh that he finally had something of a foundation in tech. At least he knew how the basic calculator worked now. The advanced one, however, was about 50 times more complex and could even have additional functions manually programmed into it. Harry felt he could program something simple into it but not much for the moment. However, he at least had some confidence he could do this. If nothing else, at least the lines of codes he knew were contained within the electronics were no longer complete gibberish. The problem now was that he was bored. He was no longer capable of looking at another line of code or tech book. He needed something else to break himself in. Harry opened up the menu and looked through the settings. This was a new feature which was grayed out during the tutorial and couldn't be adjusted. The settings included sound, visual, format, and controls. Sound settings actually allowed him to change the relative volume he heard of specific sounds such as voices, music, and other things. This meant that Harry could have a music player play at low volume and use the settings to increase the volume of what he heard while setting all other sounds to 0. He could even set everything to 0 and make himself deaf. He could already think of a few applications for deaf on demand. Format and controls simply showed how everything displayed and how he interacted with it. The control allowed for touch, voice, and mental controls, but to be safe Harry changed it to mental only so he didn't accidentally move or say something that could affect his pop-ups. Display, however, was far more than it initially looked. Pun intended. Harry could give himself nighttime vision by adjusting the lighting, though he'd have to manually change it back or he'd be blinded in the day. He could adjust specific colors or set it so that everything he saw was green. However, the function on the display setting that Harry found the most amazing was the energy sense prompt. Harry turned it on and suddenly he had a new sense. Harry himself was basically composed of energy imitating matter, and since he absorbed energy to live and could dominate and absorb energy to level up, he wondered why he couldn't sense it before. Now he could. In the space he felt more than a dozen distinct energy types, and there were likely hundreds more hidden below the surface. In his living room he felt 4 types that were more prevalent than others. The most common seemed to be the ambient energy of empty space. He had no idea what it really was or what it did though. The second most common was the heat energy coming from the fireplace. The third energy type actually originated from himself and seemed to be embedded in the house as well. This energy Harry did have a reference from the Potter library. One of his great-great-uncles in the early part of the 20th century had studied physics and called this energy exotic energy. He said it occurred naturally in very small quantities in nature, specifically around ley lines which he called intersections, though he did not reference what they were intersections of. Exotic energy changed the laws of physics slightly, though the more around, the greater the change. It was considered uncontrollable and a nuisance, yet witches and wizards not only controlled it, they naturally produced it as well. And of course the fourth energy in the living room came from Goose. This energy actually seemed similar to the ambient energy of empty space, it was just a different color. Harry looked at a few other items and concluded that other objects had very little energy within except for heat energy for temperature and exotic energy for some of the magical items. Harry took the simple calculator out of his inventory and noticed he could also sense electrical energy. He didn't see it with his eyes either, it was more of an awareness he gained. Harry wondered if it was a good idea to keep this on as it could easily be a distraction, but decided it was too useful. He figured he always had this ability but it had been turned off until now. Harry wondered what type of energies filled the tutorial area, as if that was the land of the dead, there wouldn't be empty space or heat, would there? Harry figured the reason this setting was off during the tutorial was that the only energy in the tutorial was death energy. Death energy was only good for the dead and it would be better not to get used to feeling it for someone who was to return to life. At that realization Harry suddenly understood why his level went back to 1 after the tutorial completed. Besides necromancers and those who intended to desecrate the death energy wasn't compatible for living beings. Ding. Int +1. Intelligence has reached 40. Battle meditation unlocked. Okay, that was new. Harry opened up the new section of his menu and reviewed the details. It seemed Harry could enter a state where he could absorb ambient energy to level up, but doing so required dominating it, so within his trance the energy he absorbed would take the form of a monster and he would have to battle and defeat it on a mental plane to absorb it. Luckily if he lost he wouldn't die but he would take damage, so he shouldn't do it unless healthy. Harry wondered who thought this system up and if they were a genius or insane. Harry decided to try it out and hope he didn't die. He was given a selection of energies to choose from but it looked quite foreboding. Dimensional energy, recommended level 5200. Heat energy, recommended level 110. Exotic energy, recommended level 1030. Flurkin pocket dimensional energy, recommended level 250-300. Time energy, recommended level 300-500. Harry glanced back down at the sleeping cat that apparently had a pocket dimension and again wondered what exactly it was. Harry selected heat energy of course and felt his mind clear and go far from his body. He found himself in a white, empty space that seemed quite hot. Harry noticed movement and saw a snake that appeared to be made of flames. According to one of the books Harry had in his internal library, it was a Ashwinder, though a small one. Harry used a weak, silent Aqua Eructo charm which summoned a stream of water from his hand and doused the flame snake. Although it was a 4th year spell, the spell could be used at various levels of power, so Harry could use it at a low level for now. The Ashwinder was quick but the water spray was quite wide. It didn't douse right away but Harry kept up the spell and before the snake could get any closer to Harry it died and dispersed into particles of light which Harry absorbed. 2 more Ashwinders approached and Harry had to move while casting. Harry tried Diffindo at one of them which, although a 2nd year spell, in the 4th year they teach you how to make it stronger and Harry used the 4th year version. The spell struck one of the snakes while the other got out of the way but the snake it cut in half continued slithering towards Harry. Harry decided to give up practicing his spells and just finish it for now. He used an extinguishing charm which basically was a one-hit kill for Ashwinders and started to grind in earnest. Mostly, the small Ashwinders barely gave any energy and it would likely take 2 hours for Harry to get to level 2. But since every level beyond 1 would protect him from dying a pointless death, it was worth it no matter how mind-numbingly boring. Goose woke up during Harry's battle meditation and noticed the heat from the fireplace going into the human. It was getting a bit too warm for comfort so she jumped off Harry and went to another couch which was on the other side of the fireplace. Suddenly a snake made of flames came out of the fireplace. The rug it slithered on was smoldering and Goose figured the human had no awareness of what he was doing. The Ashwinder's instincts were to find a dark place and lay eggs which would later erupt into flames. The fact that this may burn the house down wasn't something it cared for. Goose jumped in front of it which caused the Ashwinder to hiss a threat at the orange cat. Goose's mouth opened and over a dozen purple tentacles launched out, their total volume several times greater than Goose's. The Ashwinder recoiled back and tried to get away but a moment later the tentacles had the fire snake wrapped up without getting burned and retracted back into the orange tabby cat. Goose burped with a small flame and thought it was spicy but not bad. For making her work, she wondered if she should scratch the human. However, she remembered the last human she scratched who still hadn't recovered and thought they were quite a fragile species. Then again this one wasn't a normal human. Goose decided she'd let it go this time but next time the human would get scratched. Harry got up an hour later after gaining a level and putting the stats toward wisdom. Wisdom lowered the difficulty of spells and Harry had trouble using spells above 4th year with less than 40 wisdom. Harry wondered how this translated to other people as he doubted that 5th year Hogwarts students all had wisdom enough to make the 4 times wiser than an average adult. He then noticed the scorch marks on the rug and asked Goose who was on the couch, what happened? Goose conveyed back, the fireplace worked overtime because of you. An Ashwinder popped out. I dealt with it this time. Now feed me lunch. The fact that Harry was being scolded by his pet, and he was now seriously questioning which of them was the pet, was disconcerting. The fact that his cat seemed to understand exactly what an Ashwinder was and how the fireplace could have produced one even more so. Harry felt he would regret asking how Goose dealt with it so didn't ask. That wise decision was thanks to his increased wisdom. Harry knew that Ashvinders were born of magic fires, but fireplaces had safeties that prevented them usually. However, Harry absorbing its energy seemed to have had an effect. Harry got up and said, "Thank you, Goose. Now what would you like? Chicken, fish, or beef?" Goose approached the kitchen and answered back through their connection, "Beef." Harry opened 2 cans and set them on Goose's plate. Just like when Goose asked if Harry ate or this Ashwinder thing, both let Harry know Goose did in fact give a damn about him, even if it was only because Goose considered Harry her human. Harry spent the remainder of the day going back and forth between learning tech and battle mediation. When he went outside, he found several other types of energy to absorb, including sun energy, electromagnetic energy, and nature energy. Nature energy was for levels 540, and Harry found it a much better source than his fireplace, as the nature energy monsters were normal animals similar to the monsters he faced in the tutorial and could be defeated with magic or conjured weapons. The levels of the monsters seemed to scale up with him, so after a few days he reached level 10. In order to add more variety to his time and because he felt guilty for not doing so already, Harry added physical exercise back into his routine. The village trainer had him do it every day, but Harry had been slacking and now he felt bad about not taking advantage of what he had. In the tutorial, stamina would recover at a slow pace, but here Harry could eat or sleep to restore it, meaning he could work out far more. Harry started pausing more and would use paused time to comprehend how tech worked until he couldn't take it anymore, then would go outside and use nature energy battle mediation, and once that was over he would exercise till he dropped and eat or sleep. Once he woke up he would pause and do it again. One of the more advanced practices Harry's parents insisted he learn was apparition. When needed, Harry would apparate to London for groceries or another book or some tech gadget he wanted to figure out. Harry left the door open for Goose to enter and leave as she wished, which the Flurkin did take advantage of. 2 weeks after Harry started, he faced a small problem. The advanced calculator died. Harry had been spending time practicing his programming skills by trying to set up various things in the advanced calculator, including trying to make a simple video game. When Harry placed it back into his inventory, he noticed that the base programming code seemed corrupted. Harry had to go back to London and buy another and compare the two to get an idea of what happened. Unfortunately, the answer was what he had been fearing. Magic fried it. Harry knew exotic energies would change physics, but he wasn't using magic around the calculators. They were always in his inventory, which wasn't actually magic, so they weren't affected. Harry had only taken the BlackBerry out twice and it still worked, so that pretty much concluded that the inventory was not magic. After thinking about it for a while, Harry figured that the ambient exotic energy he was emitting was enough to fry it over time. This wasn't acceptable as it would prevent him from living properly in the non-magical world. Harry shifted through the spells in the grimoires in his inventory, and thanks to his int getting to 75, Harry's speed of thought was faster than a computer's search engine. A 2004 computer anyways. He found 3 different possibilities. The first was a practice which would hide his magic, making him seem like a non-magical, though of course he couldn't cast magic in this state. He also found an experimental set of runes in one of his ancestors' grimoires that had an effect of expelling ambient exotic energy. If used on tech, it would prolong the shelf life as long as magic was not directly used on it. The last was a different set of runes that would freeze the state of something. If altered, it might prevent degradation due to exotic energy on tech. Harry would try for the first 2 for now and the third later, since the third required more experimentation. He had 3 more weeks until Hogwarts and didn't want to stop studying tech just because the castle would fry the ever-loving daylights out of anything more complex than a toaster. Harry also had the goal of getting to level 30 before Hogwarts, since he wanted at least 100 points in both wisdom and intelligence, with the rest going to agility. He wanted to have the spells for every year down as fast as he could, which would allow him to make the most of his Hogwarts time. Once Harry got into his groove, he was able to level up once or twice a day. Thanks to continued exercise and martial practice against monsters, Harry's martial path finally ranked up to 5, and many hours of studying various high school and college books got Harry's scholar path up to rank 5 as well. By the final week, Harry had gotten tech to rank 4, and since his third BlackBerry had a successful rune pattern inscribed, it could be used for practice without dying. BlackBerries 1 and 2 were not so fortunate. Harry spent pretty much the remainder of the last week entirely on tech. He regretted that his house had no phone line, because even if he could use a portable generator to charge things, he couldn't get a computer and the internet. At least for now. Ping. Tech path has risen to rank 5. Quest complete, Jack of all trades. Reward, Necklace of Chosen Path. Harry collapsed in mental exhaustion and let out an exasperated, and slightly overly dramatic, sigh of relief. Today was August 30th, so he finished with no time to spare. Since it was in his inventory, Harry knew what the necklace was and what it did. When he equipped it, he had to select a path, and the rank of that path would increase by 3. He could unequip it and re-equip to select the same or a different path. Very useful. The odd thing, however, was that he had no idea how it worked. Several of the books Harry bought had enchantments on them that prevented wear and tear, and while in his inventory, Harry understood these and could easily replicate them as long as he knew the steps used to make them. The same was true for the necklace he bought from the goblins that cast a glamour that changed his hair color. Harry could make his own now, though it wouldn't be easy. At least he felt he could brute force the process if need be. The new necklace, on the other hand, didn't give him any info on how it worked, and Harry couldn't think of any way to replicate the effect. Oh well. The next day, Harry got an empty trunk from a closet in the house and got Goose's carrier. he said to the Flurkin, "Today we're heading to Hogwarts, a magical school." Goose entered her carrier with a sassy meow that implied, "Watch me care less. Just watch me." Harry shook his head and wondered what kind of thing would have to happen for his cat to get interested in something. Harry set the ward key to hide the house again and apparat to King's Cross Station. He was wearing the goblin necklace which for some reason he couldn't wear with the necklace of chosen path. Harry figured it was a game thing, can't wear more than one necklace at the same time and all that. Harry scouted the location earlier so he was able to apparate directly to the loading area which thankfully didn't have anyone looking to question how an 11-year-old was apparating there to begin with. Each magical walking around contained a source of exotic energy according to Harry's new energy sense. The old-style train on the platform even had plenty of it infused into the frame itself. Deciding not to stall any longer, Harry took Goose and his empty trunk to the entrance of the train, and was stopped by a pop-up. Hogwarts Express ticket required for entry. Do you wish to use the ticket? Yes, no. Harry remembered the ticket he got with his letter but it was still in his inventory. Harry had set the prompts to only work through thought to avoid accidents and thought aloud yes. A moment later Harry felt the exotic energy trace on the ticket change. Before he could take another step forward, he was confronted by yet another pop-up. Dungeon generation active. You are about to enter Hogwarts. Please select difficulty. Easy, normal, hard, hell. Rewards scale to match difficulty. Harry's only thought was, what the hell? Hell difficulty selected. New. Harry had to prevent himself from crying out. Chapter 4, Welcome to Hogwarts. Harry left the train and station through the hidden gate and re-entered 3 times before giving up. The pop-up didn't return meaning he either had to drop out or accept his doom. He was moderately leaning towards the former but he had no other plans and according to wizarding law, things would get very complicated for him if he didn't go to Hogwarts now that he was 11. Deciding to accept his fate, Harry picked up his empty trunk and Goose and boarded the train. He was an hour early which was the main reason no one noticed him apparating which was entirely the point of arriving early. Thanks to that he also found a number of empty compartments and picked one out before letting Goose out of her carrier. She jumped on the seat next to Harry whose life was slowly passing before his eyes and he approached his inevitable death. About half an hour in, Harry heard a scratching sound at the door which Goose noticed as well and conveyed, "Open the door." Harry got up to do so and a fluffy orange cat outside took a peek inside before spotting Goose and jumping on the seat next to her. A moment later a bushy-haired girl came up the hallway dragging her trunk and said, "Crookshanks, you can't just run off like that." Through the bond Harry asked Goose if this was a friend and Goose conveyed back that Crookshanks was her old roommate from the store. Harry wondered if he was a flirkin for a moment before dismissing the idea. Harry's energy sense showed a trace amount of exotic energy in the cat meaning it was at least partially magical, but it had none of the pocket dimensional energy Goose had. Harry looked back to the newcomer and said, "It seems our cats already know each other." Harry held out his hand and said, "I'm Harry." The girl saw as well that her cat was sitting next to the smaller orange cat and let out a sigh of relief. She noticed Harry's hand and took it before shaking and said, "I'm Hermione." Harry looked at Hermione's trunk and said, "Would you like to come in?" Hermione hesitated for a moment but seeing her own cat sitting next to Harry's seemed as good a reason as any to accept. "All right, just let me get my trunk." Harry being the gentleman of course got up to lift her trunk onto the overhead rack. Although he was strong, he was still surprised at the weight of the luggage. Of course not as surprised as Hermione was seeing him lift a trunk with over a dozen books with a single arm like it was made of styrofoam. For the first time Harry noticed that Hermione was in her robes. His father had told him that he needed to wear his robes when he entered the castle, but he also said the train ride was going to be 9 hours long. In order to break the ice, Harry said, "Can I ask why you're wearing your robes?" Hermione took a breath and spoke with a matter-of-fact nuance. "Well, we're supposed to be wearing our robes for the first day." Harry smirked and said, "Which is 9 hours from now. Will you sleep in your robes tonight if your first class is 8 hours from bedtime?" "Well no, of course not, you wouldn't sleep in your robes." Harry inferred that she didn't get the point he was trying to make and that pushing it might have the opposite effect. Hermione decided to make an attempt at conversation and asked, "Are you from a wizard family or muggle-born?" Harry's clothing was plain and just a little old-fashioned so he could pass as either a pure blood in casual garb or a muggle-born with fine taste. He answered plainly, "Neither. I am an anomaly, an aberration, a tear in reality and a magnet of impending doom. You have been warned." After a moment of contemplation Hermione rebutted, "That's not a very good joke." Harry shrugged his shoulders and said, "Just preparing you for what is to come. I hope you're not a fan of rules and common sense, because neither are on speaking terms with me." She looked partially offended and said, "What do you have against rules?" Harry said, "Nothing, it's them that seem to have something against me. You know how things are supposed to work certain ways like they always have and always will? Those things take one look at me and tend to explode." "That doesn't make any sense," she accused. Harry smiled, "Nope. Thus is my life. Anyways, have you read any of the books yet?" Deciding not to argue with the change of subject, she answered happily, "Of course. My birthday is in September so I got my letter 11 months ago and have spent that time reading as much as I can. It's all quite fascinating. Have you read the material?" Harry wondered how she would feel if he told her he hadn't read any of the books but knew all their content by heart. Deciding to lie, Harry said, "Yes, I've gone through them all. Far too structured for my taste though. What's wrong with structure? In the mundane world, not much. But aren't we on a magical train about to head to a magic school in a magic castle to learn magic? Structure seems a bit out of place if you ask me. The door opened and a shy-looking young lad with brown hair and a bowl cut asked, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" Harry scooted over and said, "Not at all. Thanks," he answered back before dragging his case inside and setting it on the rack. He looked over at the two orange cats and said, "Are those yours?" Harry was tempted to answer sarcastically but felt it might scare him away. Instead he answered, "Yup, mine's the orange one." Hermione rolled her eyes but couldn't keep herself from smirking. She answered back while pointing at the larger fluffier one, "That's Crookshanks, he's half Neasel." Harry pointed at his and said, "That's Goose, she's a flurkin." Hermione frowned at the unfamiliar term and asked, "What's a flurkin?" Harry shrugged and said, "No idea, but this one looks exactly like a cat." The new boy looked confused and Hermione said to him, "I'm not sure if he's joking." She straightened up and said, "I'm Hermione Granger." Neville Longbottom. Both turned to Harry and said, "I'm Harry." Hermione noticed that he hadn't given his family name before when he introduced himself earlier and asked, "What's your full name?" "Harry James something or other." "Haven't used it before so no point in starting before we get to Hogwarts." Harry recognized Neville's name as his parents said they were friends of the Longbottoms and wondered what they were like. Hermione wasn't pleased with the non-answer but after several exchanges was already getting used to Harry. Neville turned back to the cats and said, "I was going to bring a toad my gran bought for me but I couldn't find it this morning. My gran said she'd find it and mail it to me but I'm not sure if it isn't just better to leave him home." Harry asked, "Do you plan on being an apothecary or potion master?" Neville shook his head, "Merlin, no, I like plants but I don't think I'd be good at anything like that." "Then it would probably be better to leave the toad." Hermione asked, "Why?" Harry answered, "Toads have 100 or so uses as potions ingredients and skilled potion masters raise their own on specific diets which changes the properties of these ingredients. In other words, a pet toad is practice for raising them for ingredients later." Hermione gasped, "That's barbaric." Harry shrugged, "Not really. Some magical ingredients can't be used on their own as their properties are far too harsh. If fed in small quantities to the right kind of toad over a period of time, some of the toad's organs would gain these properties and are far more mild to use in a potion. Many lives have been saved through the sacrifice of a toad. What mundane scientists do to mice when studying drugs is much worse." Neville was partly intrigued and partly disturbed while Hermione was mostly confused. She asked, "Where did you learn that?" Most Potent Potions Volume 3. Only available through direct ordering. "Can I borrow it?" she asked. Harry answered, "Not until Christmas break I'm afraid. The book has many things the school would not appreciate young children reading and if you were caught reading it by a teacher it would most certainly be confiscated." Hermione's scandalized look almost made Harry burst into laughter but he successfully suppressed it while thinking of a plan. After realizing where the girl's priorities lie, Harry figured he could corrupt her to the dark path of rule-breaking with the proper incentives. Harry said, "Hermione, there is no skipping grades in magic school and there is no real benefit given to any student for reading ahead or doing better than others. Because of that, they won't allow you to learn beyond what they think you should. In other words, you're not going to be allowed to learn lots of things until they think the rest of your age group is ready, despite how far ahead of them you are." Before Hermione could explode, Neville said, "Wait, my gran said students who do well are rewarded." Hermione latched on to that and said, "That's right. Hogwarts A history says each house has an hourglass filled with gemstones which fill out when points are given for achievements." Harry smiled and answered back, "Hermione, I've read Hogwarts, a history as well. First place at the end of the year gets the house cup. Now tell me, according to Hogwarts, a history, what are the benefits of winning the house cup? What advantage does that house gain over the second, third, and last place houses?" Hermione frowned and seemed to be thinking furiously. Harry gave it to the count of 10 before continuing, "As I said, there is no real benefit to learning ahead. This means that the teachers not only won't help you, they will actively hinder you if you try to rush ahead of your year. There is only one way to learn at the pace you want." It only took a moment of hesitation before Hermione took the bait and asked, "What way?" Harry smiled innocently and said, "Ignore the teachers and teach yourself of course." Neville asked, "Are you going to do that?" Harry answered back, "I've acquired the textbooks for all 7 years and I've read them all and practiced up to 3rd year. I want to master 4th year content before November." Hermione looked like she wanted to say something but the twisted logic Harry infected her with prevented her from coming up with a reason why that was not allowed. Harry gave her an olive branch and said, "Hermione, if you have any questions about what you read or any request to learn things from other years, all you have to do is ask." Hermione had little choice but to give into temptation and proceeded to ask question after question on many of the things she couldn't figure out and some of the things she wanted to learn that were not available until later years. Neville was almost tempted to break out a parchment and quill just listening to the pair as Harry was a very good teacher. Right before the train left, the door opened and a redhead peered in and saw 3 kids and 2 cats and closed the door. Harry didn't let it bother him and continued walking Hermione through some of the theories and practices that he learned, discovered on his own, or found in some of the journals or grimoires of his library. Hermione was in no way used to being the one asking questions and learning from someone of her own age group. She was always the useful one, the one others relied on, and Harry seemed to take that away from her. That feeling however vanished quickly as she was learning with greater speed than hours of reading and rereading had done for her before. So many things which had stumped her before now made perfect sense. After that she subconsciously stopped treating Harry like a peer and started thinking of him as a teacher. That way she was still the smartest of her peers. The main reason Harry was capable of explaining something he never taught before was the autocorrection assist of his scholar path, which subconsciously provided him with the appropriate means to teach the subject. The scholar path was the path of both the student and the teacher and increased the rate he could absorb, understand, and accurately impart knowledge. Some time after the train departed, Neville started asking questions once he knew Harry had lots of knowledge on potions and herbology. Although he was actually just referencing and cross-referencing different books and theories, Harry still sounded professional in his answers and theories on how specific processes worked, though truth was that the last plant he touched was the weeds he had to pull out of Petunia's yard. When Goose asked for food, Harry took his trunk out and opened it facing him, and with his hand hidden in it he pulled out some food for Goose and Crookshanks from his inventory. Harry didn't want to conjure plates in front of Neville and Hermione, so he just opened the cans and set them in front of the cats. Hermione thanked Harry and continued leeching the secrets of the universe from his noggin. At some point the train whistle could be heard, which meant they would arrive in 15 minutes. Harry got his trunk once more and left the compartment for a moment before confirming the hall was empty and simply equipping his robes from the inventory. When Harry entered he saw Neville was just placing his robes over his other clothes, which Hermione seemed less inclined to care about even though it was an infraction of the rules. Harry was quite pleased he was able to seduce her to the dark side successfully. Now he must get her to play a prank on a teacher. Ping. New quest, Heir of the Marauders. Get Hermione Granger to play a prank on a teacher before the end of the school year. He was joking. Harry internally sighed that such a quest would pop up, but the rewards for his quests in the mortal plane had been good so far and he kinda wanted to do it anyways, so might as well. Harry moved to lift Hermione's trunk off the rack, but Neville said, "Leave it, Harry, they'll move our stuff to our rooms later." Harry wondered if whoever was going to move his things would question the weight, or lack thereof, but there was no point in considering it. The sun had already dipped below the horizon and the stars shone around the smiling crescent moon which hung over the castle in the distance. First years over here. Harry recognized the man his mum described as Hagrid bellow out for them to gather around him. Once assembled he led them to the lake shore where there were 10 boats, each glowing in Harry's senses with a concentration of exotic energy. 4 to a boat, come on now. Harry, Hermione, and Neville loaded themselves up, but the boat didn't move. Eventually the red-headed boy Harry noticed on the train earlier hopped in and the boat started moving. Harry's energy sense was working overtime as through the water, he felt the presence of an enormous mass and tentacles. A giant squid? The Potters certainly forgot to mention this. They passed under some low-hanging branches which nearly got caught in Hermione's hair before the open side of the lake came into view. It was a perfect picturesque setting of the castle on high, the moon behind it, and the reflection of both on the calm lake before them. Harry's senses noticed it was something of a play. There was a spell on the water that seemed to calm it to let the reflection appear clean, and the air seemed charged with a spell to break up the cloud cover. Although Harry knew how they pulled the look off, it was no less impressive. The boats pulled up to a small dock where everyone was able to get off. Harry was impressed at the spell that prevented the boats from rocking when they got off, as it was one that he didn't recognize. They followed a short path which led to an enormous door, and once they approached, it opened to reveal a stern-faced elderly woman. Hagrid waved behind him and said, "The first year's Professor McGonagall." "Thank you, Hagrid, I will take them from here." The professor led them up some marble stairs to another large door and welcomed them to Hogwarts. She gave a brief introduction of the point system which made Hermione frown at the confirmation of a lack of purpose behind the point system. Harry heard the redhead who had been clinging to them since the boat say something about a troll, and McGonagall moved to open the doors. Harry quickly took off his glamour necklace, causing his hair to change from dirty blonde to black. Only Hermione and Neville noticed, but before either could say anything the door was open and they were led into the Great Hall. In addition to the hundreds of students sitting on 4 very large tables were a half-dozen or so see-through grey spirits floating through the air above the tables. The Hogwarts ghosts. They flew to the crowd of new students with their interests piqued, and each conveyed their wish that the students would join their houses. McGonagall arranged the students in a line before getting out a stool and a hat. Once the hat was placed on the stool, it started to sing a song Harry doubted he would remember. At the end there was applause and McGonagall called, "Abbott, Hannah." The young girl in question walked up to the stool and sat down before the hat was placed on her head. A few moments of silence passed before the hat shouted Hufflepuff. One by one each student was shorted. Neville and Hermione got sorted into Gryffindor, and both were waiting to hear when Harry was going to be called. After Sally Ann Perks had been sorted, McGonagall froze. Silence echoed for a moment, barely hidden by the emerging whispers of confusion. From the tallest seat at the head table, the old man Harry figured was Dumbledore said, "Minerva." The professor unfroze from the shock of the name and after a cough called out, "Potter, Harry." Harry nonchalantly walked up to the stool as if he had not been publicly declared dead a year ago. McGonagall robotically placed the hat on his head as she had no idea what else to do. Interesting blocks you have here. Well, nice of them to let me through. Been to the other side, have you? That's a first." Harry thought. "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" Certainly not, your secrets are yours and yours alone to tell. Though there is much about your power you do not understand yet, but I can tell you are up to the challenge. Oh yes, I can tell you seek challenges like a bird seeks the sky. Certainly ambitious. However, a Slytherin certainly wouldn't choose hell mode. No, that's a Gryffindor if I've ever seen one. Think I'm going to die? Oh, most certainly. There are at least 4 things in this castle looking to kill you at the moment, and that number will likely double in 2 or 3 months. I'd level up if I were you, and don't skimp on the exercise and practice. Harry felt like he wanted to cry as the hat shouted, Gryffindor. The table of red and gold was the first to break the silence and shouted louder than any other time that night, welcoming Harry to their house. Harry moved to sit with Hermione and Neville, who were both giving an excellent impression of a fish at the reveal of his name. Like everyone else, Harry's robes changed from unaligned to his house colors once he sat down. Harry felt someone giving him a death glare and looked over to the head table. Dumbledore and most of the other teachers were shocked. The one Harry recognized as his mother's old acquaintance Severus looked like he'd seen a ghost, and the man in the turban, which somehow blocked his energy sense, seemed non-committal about it, though he was looking in Harry's direction. McGonagall continued the shorting while several of his new housemates started bombarding him with questions, starting with Hermione, of course. Are you really Harry Potter? Harry honestly answered, from the day I was born to the day I died. That threw most of them off, and Neville used the pause to ask, I thought you had glasses and a scar. Harry lifted his hair out of the way to reveal the faint image of his scar. Harry answered back, I got my eyes fixed and my scar started healing a year ago. A brown-haired girl leaned over the table and argued, cursed scars don't fade, that's why they're called cursed scars. Harry shrugged. He honestly had no idea why his scar didn't fade before and why it faded after he died. Once the last student was sorted, Dumbledore stood up and said, let the feast begin. Harry noticed a build-up of exotic energy over all the tables at the word feast, and it flashed at the word begin. James had told him that Hogwarts was filled with house elves who did things like this. They were the ones who made food appear and vanish and cooked and cleaned. Harry turned around and noticed several masses of exotic energy that hadn't been there before positioned along the walls. The masses were skinny and only a meter or so high. Invisible house elves, perhaps? Harry turned back to the food and started filling his plate with potatoes and meats. Though technically unnecessary, he would face awkward questions if he didn't eat, and it was not as if the act of eating was unpleasant. Oh, biscuits, I'll take 3. Harry did his best to either avoid, be purposefully vague, or be misleading on many of the questions he was asked, and the only time he told the truth was in a situation where he would absolutely not be believed. Why'd they say you blew up last year? Asked the redhead. Because if they said I detonated through magical implosion, most people wouldn't understand. At some point the invisible elves flashed their magic and the mostly empty dinner plates were replaced by plates containing desserts. After a few more minutes and those two had been taken out, Dumbledore stood up once more and announced, now that we are all fed and watered, I must once more ask for your attention, while I give out a few notices. Dumbledore took a sip from his cup before he started listing off an assortment of objects which seemed to now be banned from the school. As ever, I would like to remind you all that the forest on the grounds is out of bounds to students, as is the village of Hogsmeade to all below 3rd year. I must also tell you that this year, the 3rd floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry immediately declared to himself under no circumstances would he ever venture into that corridor. Since decomposing into energy and reconstituting himself from energy were both unimaginably painful, having a very painful death meant if he was killed there, he'd face 3 consecutive terrible pains instead of the usual 2 per death. Dumbledore continued, it is also my painful duty to inform you that the Inter-House Quidditch Cup will not take place this year. A dozen or so shouts of complaint arose from each table, the loudest of which originated from a pair of identical redheads from his own table. This is due to an event that will be starting in October, and continuing throughout the school year, taking up much of the teachers' time and energy, but I am sure you will all enjoy it immensely. I have great pleasure in announcing that this year at Hogwarts we are to have the honor of hosting a very exciting event over the coming months, an event that has not been held for over a century. It is my very great pleasure to inform you that the Triwizard Tournament will be taking place at Hogwarts this year. Harry paled as he remembered what Rockshire had told him about expecting the unexpected. He hoped he was overthinking it, but his doom announced itself in the next moment. Chapter 5 Grind to Live. New quest, survive Hogwarts. Protect Philosopher's Stone. Slay Basilisk. Master Patronus Charm. Pass the 3 tasks of the Triwizard Tournament. Defeat Voldemort. Listed items not completed before the finals of the Triwizard Tournament will be faced simultaneously. Rewards will increase for every item completed before the end of the year. Long-term penalties and restrictions will apply if full marks are not received in the final task. The announcement caused a moment of silence to wash over the Great Hall before one of the red-headed twins shouted, "You're joking." This successfully drew attention from the fact that Harry's complexion had shifted to a purer shade of white than the Hogwarts ghosts and would have fainted from the blood leaving his head if he had a human body. A number of children laughed and Dumbledore looked amused before he said, "I am not joking, though if you come find me later I can tell you an amusing one I heard about a troll, a hag, and a leprechaun who all go into a bar." McGonagall coughed, which Dumbledore took as his cue to continue. The Triwizard Tournament was first established some 700 years ago as a friendly competition between the 3 largest European schools of wizardry, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. A champion was selected to represent each school, and the 3 champions competed in 3 magical tasks. The schools took it in turns to host the tournament once every 5 years, and it was generally agreed to be a most excellent way of establishing ties between young witches and wizards of different nationalities, until, that is, the death toll mounted so high that the tournament was discontinued. Hermione seemed to be the only one who grew pale along with the already liquid paper white Harry, as the rest of the students seemed to get excited. There have been several attempts over the centuries to reinstate the tournament, none of which has been very successful. However, our own departments of international magical cooperation and magical games and sports have decided the time is ripe for another attempt. We have worked hard over the summer to ensure that this time, no champion will find himself or herself in mortal danger. Harry had no confidence in this man whatsoever. The heads of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will be arriving with their shortlisted contenders in October, and the selection of the 3 champions will take place at Halloween. An impartial judge will decide which students are most worthy to compete for the Triwizard Cup, the glory of their school, and 1,000 galleons personal prize money. Questions echoed back and forth with guesses of who was going to enter and how the judging worked. The identical redheads both looked confident and seemed sure they would enter. That confidence turned into outrage on the next line. Eager though I know all of you will be to bring the Triwizard Cup to Hogwarts, the heads of the participating schools, along with the Ministry of Magic, have agreed to impose an age restriction on contenders this year. Only students who are of age, that is to say, 17 years or older, will be allowed to put forward their names to compete in the tournament. Several boos and cries of complaint at the perfectly reasonable limitation called back and forth across the table. This is a measure we feel is necessary, given that the tournament tasks will still be difficult and dangerous, whatever precautions we take, and it is highly unlikely that students below 6th and 7th year will be able to cope with them. I will personally be ensuring that no underage student hoodwinks our impartial judge into making them Hogwarts champion. Hermione finally noticed that Harry looked even paler than she was and got Neville's attention before she asked, "Harry, what's wrong?" Harry gave a weak smirk to the pair and said, "Remember that earlier I told you that I didn't have a problem with rules and common sense, but they have a problem with me." Hermione said, "Yes, but I still don't know what you meant." Neville however caught on and said, "You think you're going to be entered into the tournament?" Once the words passed his lips an expression that was half disbelief, half horror formed. Hermione was in full disbelief and said, "There is no way they would allow a first year to enter this tournament." Harry said, "Wanna bet?" Hermione hadn't expected that and was left without a response. Harry said, "If I get entered into the tournament, you have to prank a teacher." Neville said, "Do it, Hermione, both of those are impossible, right?" Before she could answer, the group was told it was time to head to the common rooms. The young redhead from before tried to approach him but was knocked aside by the 2 older identical redheads. One said, "What's this I hear about a bet?" The other said, "And what's this I hear about a prank?" No one else was speaking as they were led to the common room, so Harry answered back in a tone that everyone could hear, "I was telling Hermione that I am a danger magnet and she didn't believe me. I bet her that if I was entered against my will in this tournament, she would have to play a prank on a teacher." The twins looked at each other and turned back to Hermione. "Well, are you going to take the bet?" Hermione's last shred of common sense and faith in the rules urged her to announce, "It's impossible for Harry to be entered as a first year, so fine. I agree." The other twin turned to look at Harry. "You really think you're going to be entered?" Harry nodded and said, "Yes, so I need to start practicing how not to die a bloody violent death." They reached a corridor in the hall next to a moving portrait of a heavy-set woman in a pink dress that looked like it had been made sometime between the 16th and 17th century. The woman took a look at the before stating, "Password." One of the taller redheads, and Merlin were there a few of them, said, "Balderdash," and the portrait swung in revealing another hall. The redhead with the title prefect turned to the first-year group and said, "This will be your dormitory for the next 7 years. Don't forget the password or you'll have to wait for someone to come along who didn't." Without waiting for a response, he entered the portrait hole and the rest followed behind. The common room had a very large fireplace and a half-dozen chairs of various types and levels of cozy. Harry somehow felt through his connection to Goose that the Flurkin was already here somewhere. The group spread out and a few turned to get Harry's attention, but he had already gone up a spiral staircase and turned a corner to find a couple of 4-poster beds, and Goose was chilling on one of them. Harry asked, "So what do you think?" Goose didn't bother to respond. She wasn't asleep, she just didn't feel answering was worth the effort. A very Goose-like response. The fact that there was a cat bed nearby which Goose obviously had no intention of using was also very like the Flurkin. Neville, the youngest redhead, and 2 others came into the room and started claiming beds. The redhead said, "How'd you know where the first-year beds were?" "My brother wouldn't tell me." Harry pointed at the orange cat who already claimed the bed next to the window and said, "I already have a familiar bond, so I could sense where she was." One of the other boys looked like he was about to say something but seemed to change his mind. Harry could practically hear the thought, "Well, it's Harry Potter." Neville got his pajamas from his trunk and went to change along with the others, leaving Harry conveniently by himself. He opened his menu and equipped his own pajamas before the others returned. Neville grabbed a chair and pulled up to Harry's bed and said, "Harry, where have you been for the last year? I heard you were in a muggle house that exploded." The other boys were getting their things out of their trunks as well, but were suddenly making an effort to do so quietly so they could hear Harry's answer. Harry turned his head and said, "Not sure to be honest. I woke up in a park a few weeks ago knowing a lot more than I knew a year before that. But I don't have any memories of learning what I knew. I had a letter though that told me a bunch of things including that I agreed to have my memories, but not my knowledge of the last year removed for my own safety." Harry waited for the others to digest this before continuing. The letter said how to get to Diagon Alley and said to go to Gringotts and give some instructions to the goblins. They were surprised I wasn't dead too, so they did a blood test and said I was me. Which is good because if I wasn't me, I don't think they would have been very nice about it. Neville visibly winced at that. Seemed the boy was familiar with goblins. I asked them a bunch of questions and they told me all they could. I didn't want to cause a ruckus so I didn't say anything until now. The redhead spoke up. "I heard my mom say you were with muggles. Why were you there?" Harry wondered if this one would ever introduce himself, but for now he had to be polite. Harry said, "I didn't know where else I could be. Before going to Gringotts, I've never stepped foot in the magic world and I'd never heard the term boy who lived. I really don't like that term though. Why not? It means you survived what no one else could, like a miracle." Harry shook his head and said, "But my mom and dad didn't. So it sounds like people are calling me the boy who lived when his parents were murdered by a psychopath." The redhead had enough sense to look down in embarrassment, not that it was his fault. A slight scurrying sound against metal could be heard in the pause and everyone but Harry turned to see a cage that sounded like it had something running around. Goose's head got up and hissed slightly. "Little pest." The redhead looked accusingly at the cat and said, "Keep her away from Scabbers." Harry didn't bother to respond since he doubted the cat-shaped flurkin would actually bother hunting a mouse or whatever that was. The various conversations didn't extend long after that as the day was tiring for the others and the bed was warm. Harry felt traces of exotic energies which matched the house elves had been used to warm the beds, which explained why Goose was already quite comfortable. Harry expertly got into bed without disturbing Goose and once comfortable he paused the world. In the frozen silence Harry got out of his bed and went to a nearby chair and focused on his stats. Harry Potter. Level 32 age 11. STR 42 AGI 75. Int 100 WIS 100. Luck 10. Warrior Path rank 5. Scholar Path rank 5. Magic Path rank 13. Tech Path rank 5. If Harry was going to get through this year with as few deaths as possible he needed more than just power, he needed an ace in the hole. One of those goals for the quest was to fight Voldemort. Harry couldn't see other people's levels, but thanks to his energy sense he could get an approximate level. Dumbledore would be level 150 with a magic path rank of 24 or so. That made him about 60 times stronger than Harry was, since every 10th rank was 10 times stronger than the first. If Harry got hold of the entire Hogwarts library and spent every waking moment practicing it, Harry figured it would still take several years just to match him. Harry doubted Voldemort was much weaker given his reputation. It wasn't the stats that were the problem. Even if Harry got to level 300, Dumbledore could still crush him thanks to superior magic usage. So learning magic was required, but using it alone to survive wouldn't work. He could build an army by teaching others using his Scholar Path bonus, but most of them would likely get killed, which he wouldn't be able to forgive himself for. The only way to beat something stronger with any guarantee was to use its weakness against it. Witches and wizards use magic, so their weakness would be something that doesn't use magic. Harry would have to bring his tech path up along with his magic path and use them in a way that a wizard couldn't fight against. Even the strongest flame dies if it has nothing to burn. Everything has a weakness. In paused time Harry couldn't use a paper or take notes of anything, so when he processed and theorized he had to do it all mentally. This was easy for some things but harder for others. Things like runes, for example, were easier to visualize when you could see them and write them down. Harry had to brute force his understanding so he could comprehend and test various rune arrangements without actually drawing them out. He wanted to figure out an exotic energy stasis rune cluster before October, which would give him time to buy and test various electronics to work in combination with magic for unexpected effects. Of course, theoretical practice could only go so far before tests must be done. Harry intended to spend each night working up to the limits of theoretical practice and would physically practice afterwards. Harry spent what could have been hours or weeks doing the mental calculations before deciding he had reached the limit and unpaused, finding himself back in bed. Since it was a sleep environment, Harry was able to fall asleep the moment his eyes closed after hitting the pillow. Ping. You have fully recovered after a night's rest. 4 hours later and Harry woke up to the silence of the dorms. Well, almost silence. The redhead snored. He could have hit the pillow again for another 4 hours, but that would have been a waste as it wasn't needed. Instead, he got up and equipped his robes and headed down into the common room. The fireplace was out but a few of the candles lit themselves when Harry entered and he found a nice table to work with. Harry turned the fireplace back on and took out a lot of parchment and quills and one by one wrote down his rune cluster tests. He could have done it with a pen or pencil and pulp paper, but the quills used actually transferred intent better according to his energy sense, which explained why they were still used. The parchment also prevented exotic energy from dissipating, so it retained it better than paper did. Thanks to these properties Harry was able to grant the proper magic effect to runes he wrote down, though it was quite weak. Still, thanks to his energy senses he could properly tell which rune clusters worked together, which would fizzle out, and which were catastrophes waiting to happen. Some arrangements however needed time to see if their effect would work or not, so many of the parchments Harry used were set aside to be checked out later. After several hours of practice which only caused 5 explosions, a new personal best, Harry heard someone coming down the stairs and gathered up all of his parchments into his arms. Before the new arrival was halfway down, Harry had thrown them all into the fireplace and left for the dormitory exit. Harry had no intention of leaving evidence of his plans for an ace in the hole. Those don't work unless no one knows about them. The portrait didn't ask for a password for Harry to leave, and he opened his map to find an exit to the castle. He remembered Neville telling him the schedules would be handed out before breakfast, but that was still an hour out, so he had time to get a morning workout done. The map of the castle was a bit odd as certain parts seemed to shift sometimes. Harry had to change directions twice after some of the paths the map showed vanished and reappeared elsewhere. The castle itself was possibly more bizarre than his parents described. According to his energy senses, there were doors that were for decoration, walls that were illusions, and places that looked like the entrance to Diagon Alley in that they seemed to require specific operations to open. Even something as ordinary as the stairs from one level to the next were far from simple, as a number of them were illusionary, and stepping on what you thought was a step would have your foot fall through and trip you up something fierce. The fact that the staircases themselves changed as they pleased would be a hassle unless he could learn to fly. Luckily there seemed to be a number of shortcuts, several of which were slides hidden behind tapestries, so his journey to the first floor was both quick and fun. Once he reached the door, a concentration of exotic energy appeared before him, though still without visible form. Harry said, "Can you move out of the way? I wish to go outside." The invisible house elf shimmered into view and said, "Students shouldn't be out before the sun rises. It be's against the rules." Harry frowned. It was about 6 a.m. but he didn't take into account the sun. Harry asked the little elf, "I wish to stretch and exercise. Is there any place for me to exercise in the castle?" Most colleges, universities, and boarding schools he'd researched had such things. It stood to reason Hogwarts would as well. The elf answered back, "There be no place like that, sir. Wizards be not good at exercising." Or not, Harry thought. The elf continued, "But I knows a place where yous can do it, sirs. I can take you there." That didn't make sense. There wasn't a place where he could exercise, but there was. Harry said, "Thank you, please do." The elf walked over to Harry and took a handful of Harry's robe and apparat them to another part of the castle. Harry was surprised that house elves could not only apparate within Hogwarts, but side-along apparate. Something to look into later. Their new location was a dead-end hall with a large moving tapestry of a large fellow attempting to teach a group of trolls how to dance. However, that was not what drew Harry's attention. The wall opposite it may have been unadorned, but to his energy sense it was practically a glowing sun. The elf motioned to the wall and said, "We be in the 7th floor, sir. This is the come and go room, also called the room of requirement. Walk before it 3 times thinking of what you want, sir, and a door to it will appear." Harry immediately paused just so the hurricane of implications that just presented itself could be properly gone over. This certainly would let him move a number of plans forward. He was even tempted to figure out elf apparition so he could pop around the castle and come here whenever he wanted. Unfortunately, it would be too easy to get caught doing that since the elves might see him and rat him out. His best defense against those who wanted him dead was a lack of information. Hell, they only figured out a few hours ago he wasn't dead, which certainly gave him a leg up. After a few more intense cycles of what-if possibilities, Harry unpaused and said to the elf, "Thank you very much for your help." The elf nodded and shimmered away. It was still there for a moment though before the concentration of exotic energy popped away. Harry walked back and forth before the wall 3 times thinking of something very specific. It was in a cartoon his mother said she used to watch when she was a kid. The energy of the wall changed and settled into a door which Harry opened quickly to find a long room with a set of weights close to the door. Harry ignored the weights and walked further into the long room and smiled as he felt the effect he requested. The further into the room he ventured, the greater the gravity. Oh yes, this would work very well. Chapter 6 Classes and First Impressions. The come and go room was more than Harry hoped was possible for training. If he wanted to practice swordsmanship, a training sword and magic training dummy would appear. If he wanted to run a lap at a specific multiple of gravity, the long room would set itself only to that gravity and a track and field lap matching what he wanted would appear. Harry really wanted to see the limits of what this room could do, but all too quickly breakfast time approached and Harry made his way back to the dormitory. Harry really liked the slide shortcuts. After giving the fat lady in the portrait the password, she opened up and Harry returned to the common room to find Hermione and Neville along with the rest of his house. Hermione spotted him first and said, "Harry, where were you?" Neville said he didn't see you when he got up and was worried. Harry noticed a bit of worry in her own voice as well, which made Harry feel warm. Having friends who cared for him was very different for him. "I'm sorry, Hermione, I left to explore the castle. Do they have maps or something, because without one it's not going to be easy finding anything." The twin redheads seemed to appear from the shadows and the first said, "You can ask the professor for a map." The second twin continued, "But the maps don't show any of the secret paths." Harry remembered what his father said about making his own map, but said most of the work was done by Remus Lupin, so Harry doubted he could make another from scratch without putting more time than he wanted or seeing the original. Then again, he only needed a map to cover for his own, so he didn't want to dedicate that much time to it. Hermione looked like she wanted to say something before looking at Harry and getting distracted by something. She asked with the barest hint of a blush, "Harry, those robes aren't Madame Malkin's, are they?" Harry did notice that his robes had a nicer sheen and cleaner edges along with a complete lack of fuzz on top of the cloth compared to everyone else's robes. Harry answered, I don't know. I found them in a closet in my family's manor, so I don't know who made them. They look nice though. Another brown-haired girl half a head taller than Hermione said, they do look good on you. Maybe a bit tight but in a good way. Harry noticed that she was looking at his butt and Harry immediately started to blush. A few of the girls who saw this unconsciously smiled. Hermione, wanting to move to a safer topic, said the prefect said Professor McGonagall should be here soon with our schedule soon. No sooner had Hermione spoken than the portrait door had opened revealing their head of house. She handed a stack of papers to 3 of the taller students who started calling out names before she went to Harry and said, Mr. Potter, a word if you please, before motioning for Harry to follow her away from the crowd. Harry followed but was a bit tense. He was only slightly relieved by the fact that his father really put him through the ringer when it came to training for lying on the spot, so Harry would simply have to see if it was worth it. Once out of earshot of the other students, the professor said, here is your schedule, but I'd like a few answers from you. Where have you been for the last 13 months? Harry nodded, expecting this of course. For the last month I stayed in Potter Manor, which the goblins gave me a portkey to. The 12 months before that, however, I don't know. 5 weeks ago I woke up in a park with 2 letters. One said it was from my father and gave some instructions. The other said I have been obliviated for the last 12 months for my own protection and the protection of others. The letters said to burn them, which I didn't at first. Then I found out how famous I was and what people thought happened to me. If whoever wrote them was bad, I wouldn't be here, so I did burn them. The professor was following the story and watching her young ward very closely. Harry however mixed some truth into the lies which she would be able to confirm, and the lies had no way to be found out. At least according to Harry's father, who fabricated the story for him. McGonagall thought the situation over for some time before saying, do you have all your school materials? Harry shrugged. I think so. I found a trunk in Potter Manor that had what I think was my dad's school things and a wand which works fine for me. It had a lot of books, a cauldron, and a bunch of other things. I took that and some robes I found in a closet. Harry pretended to only now notice the look of worry on his head of house's expression and quickly said, I'll ask Hermione if there is anything I'm missing and get back to you later on that. Is that all right? The professor nodded and said, very well. May I ask what the instructions on those letters were for? Just how to get to Gringotts, what to ask of the goblins to get Potter Manor's portkey, and how to get to Hogwarts. Harry spoke in a flat tone and purposefully fidgeted, which was an easy cue for McGonagall to pick up on to guess he was lying or leaving something out. One of his favorite shows to watch while dead was a crime drama that explained the science of lying and deception, and he spent a long time deciphering and practicing the art with his father using that as a base. Harry noticed a slight twitch in the corner of her mouth, showing her amusement at seeing Harry lie so badly, meaning she was less likely to question the validity of the rest of his story. Without calling Harry out on his lie, McGonagall told him he could return to his friends and get some breakfast. Harry knew she would investigate or ask others to investigate his tale. The best she could do was take Harry's picture and show it around every store in Diagon Alley. All that would accomplish, however, if they recognized Harry with black hair, was learning what Harry bought and where he bought it. Even this would take time and wasn't guaranteed to work. The main thing, however, was that it would distract from the 12 months before that, meaning the only facts that could get out was that he lied about where he got his supplies. This was on purpose, as Harry already covered that by being caught lying about the letters' instructions, so he could easily amend his story and say the letters told him where to go and what to buy. Harry found Hermione and Neville waiting for him before heading out to the Great Hall for breakfast. Hermione asked what the professor wanted and Harry repeated back McGonagall's questions. Hermione and Neville both caught on that Harry had likely lied to her, but neither brought it up. Breakfast was slightly interrupted when the red-headed first year, who had yet to introduce himself, saw Harry approach the table and started telling him which things were good and which were great like a professional food critic. Harry didn't let it bother him and responded when questioned, which seemed to settle the redhead for now. The schedule was broken into breakfast, early morning period, late morning period, lunch, afternoon period, and evening period. The only exception was Wednesdays, which included a midnight period specifically for astrology. Not all periods each day always had a class. Thursday early morning was blank, so everyone could sleep in after the prior midnight class. Today's schedule had herbology, then charms, followed by transfiguration after lunch. Lily had told him that once third year started, 3 electives were required, meaning the first 2 years would have many empty time slots which would be filled later. Harry had very little intention of wasting that time. Harry called over Hermione and Neville, there's loads of free time, so if we get through our homework quickly we can practice and study the good stuff. Hermione looked like she wanted to complain about getting through the homework quickly, but Harry had already told her that whether or not every homework assignment was graded outstanding or troll, none of it mattered except the finals of each year. Even if that wasn't a good enough reason to slack on the homework, the time saved being used to study higher level subject matter was too much of a temptation for the young bookworm. Not too surprisingly, the first class of each subject was the introduction and safety practices that they all had to go over. The only class which had some flavor was transfiguration. In the beginning of the class, Harry saw a grey tabby cat with a ridiculously high concentration of exotic energy for a cat. Once everyone had arrived to class, it jumped off and transformed into the teacher. McGonagall's introduction to Transfiguration included a warning that if anyone messed around in her class, they would not be coming back. After the final class, Hermione almost started walking in the direction of the Gryffindor common rooms, but Harry told her there were plenty of empty classrooms to use to study. Hermione was almost tempted to argue until she recalled the redhead who kept inviting them to play chess against him over and over. Harry finished his homework first, only giving just slightly more than the minimum required length before he went to help Neville. After they both finished, Harry checked on Hermione and had to spend 5 minutes explaining to her that regurgitating everything she could think of onto a paper and exceeding the length requirements threefold was not helping her become smarter. Time spent showing off how much she knew was better spent learning something she didn't know. She eventually relented, but Harry recognized that some habits die easier than others. Harry already knew that studying with them wouldn't make him stronger, but he intended to use the time to grind his scholar path, which not only made it easier to teach, but easier to learn as well. The time he lost in tutoring would be gained back with faster learning later. He started them on their next 3 weeks' worth of lessons on the 3 classes they took, showing both of them the different ways to cast the same spell and letting them both try and feel the differences. Once done, Harry said he intended to do some self-study in another part of the castle and encouraged Hermione to figure out what she wanted to learn next without being told by a teacher or syllabus. This of course led her to scurrying off to the library. Neville went back to the Gryffindor common rooms to see what the other students were doing. Harry noticed Neville's confidence increased once Harry showed him how to use magic in spite of his wand rather than with it. Neville was using a badly fitted wand for him, and Harry had already told him he should either get a new one or learn wandless magic. Considering how much his gran worried him, Neville seemed inclined towards the latter. Harry didn't bother getting dinner as he already put a lot of food in his inventory, which would help him speed his stamina recovery later. He returned to the room of requirements, but instead of asking for a workout room, he asked for a room that would assist him in meditation. The room obliged, and Harry found a room that appeared to have ritual markings and candles around. Harry sat in the middle and started his battle mediation. He couldn't risk doing this somewhere he could be observed, as absorbing energy had odd effects around him which he couldn't bet would go unnoticed. Dimensional energy, recommended level 5200. Exotic energy, recommended level 1030. Concentrated exotic energy, recommended level 3090. Time energy, recommended level 300-500. The list of available energies he could absorb showed some changes but not many. The concentrated exotic energy was a specific feature of the school. Centuries of housing hundreds of witches and wizards left the very foundation of the school saturated with exotic energy that let Harry know anything more complicated than a typewriter would fry the moment it entered this castle. And that was to say nothing of the 3 intersecting ley lines Hogwarts was built atop. Harry selected concentrated exotic energies and spent the next 2 hours slaying familiar-looking magic creatures such as adult fire crabs and 2-headed snakes. The snakes themselves were odd, as Harry could quite clearly understand both heads as they declared him dinner. It reminded him that he once spoke with a garden snake in his aunt's garden. Harry mentally browsed through his library and found the ability was called Parseltongue, and someone who had that ability was called a Parselmouth, someone who could speak to snakes. Some of the books referenced specific magics that needed to be cast in Parseltongue, but none of them had any details on such magics, as Parseltongue was a rare, rather frowned upon gift associated with the darker arts, of which there were none in the Potter library. After getting to level 32, Harry finished his meditation and changed the room back to the gravity gym and did everything he could to tear his body down for the next 90 minutes. Once thoroughly exhausted, Harry got his dinner from his inventory and finished it to recover the stamina needed to return to the dormitory. One interesting thing about Harry's physiology was that he did in fact sweat, and it did have a smell, but after a short while both sweat and smell would vanish just like any blood taken from him. It was thanks to this that Harry didn't look completely soaked or smell like a gym bag by the time he returned to the dormitory. Harry was once more accosted by the unnamed redhead and relented to playing a game of chess with him. Wizard's chess anyways. The pieces apparently would try to tell him what they wanted him to do and argue with the moves he made instead. Harry had never actually played chess before but knew the rules. Most of them anyways. Harry got most of his pieces taken quickly but learned much by then, and though he still lost he prolonged the inevitable for a while. The redhead asked if he wanted to play again, but Harry said he'd be up for it tomorrow, which the redhead seemed to accept. Neville was playing another game with some of the other dorm mates, and the red-headed twins were trying to get some first years to eat some candy. A second year kindly warned Harry that those two were Fred and George Weasley, 6th years, and the opposite of their brother Percy, who was a 7th year and head boy. While Percy was a stick in the mud and would deduct points to enforce his authority, the twins were troublemakers who enjoyed coming up with new pranks and testing them on unsuspecting first ties. Harry thanked the man who actually bothered to introduce himself as Cormac McLaggen and took the advice to heart. Outwardly anyways. Harry felt his father would be greatly disappointed in him if he didn't react accordingly when challenged at pranking. A half hour before bedtime, Hermione returned and went straight for Harry with an assortment of questions. She actually had a list of topics she'd written down she wanted clarification on. Partially. Harry felt at least half the list was specifically to find a subject matter Harry did not know about. It did however remind Harry he needed to check out the school library. Then again, if he needed books, perhaps the room of requirements had something. Although Hermione didn't come up with any subjects he wasn't familiar with, she did at least get a better grasp on many subjects and an outline of what she wanted to learn. Harry eventually went to bed and saw Crookshanks chilling with Goose. "How's the castle, Goose?" "It has proved moderately amusing," she conveyed back. Seemed that the pets of the students were pretty much attended by the house elves for food and care. Also there were secret paths and walkways usable by cats that lead to the rooms with litter boxes, rooms with herbs cats could chew on which were healthy, and rooms magically lit and heated where cats could sunbathe even at midnight. Harry shook his head that being spoiled rotten, for Goose anyways, simply amounted to moderately amusing. Once all set in his bed, Harry paused again and went over the advances he made in runic theory and practice until his brain gave out and he had to unpause and go to sleep. 4 hours later Harry got up and went straight for the room of requirements and asked for a room of books. The room that appeared certainly had a number of books, but the books were mostly old textbooks and seemingly unreturned library books. Some of the books had writing that plainly asked, if lost, return to ECT. After some thinking Harry figured the only books the room could produce that Harry could put into his inventory were actual books that others had lost. Harry had long since confirmed he couldn't place conjured items in his inventory, so even if this room conjured a copy of every book in the library, it wouldn't be useful for Harry. Of course the number of books lost on Hogwarts grounds since whenever the last time someone collected them was still far from a small number. There were at least 20 times as many books as Potter Manor's library, and many of the textbooks had personal notes written on the pages which added to Harry's database. Harry finished collecting them all just before breakfast and headed back down to meet his dorm mates before they went to the Great Hall. Today's classes were Defense Against the Dark Arts, History of Magic, Transfiguration again, and Charms again. Dada was as boring as it was unnerving. Harry finally got an answer to who had been aiming the killing intent he usually only felt from monsters at him on the first day. Professor Quirrell spoke with a fake stutter and although seemed to ignore him, also seemed to hate his very existence. The turban which blocked Harry's energy sense seemed all the more suspicious as such a property should not be on something accidentally. The overwhelming smell of garlic in the room was thankfully not an issue as Harry could adjust his sense of smell in his settings. History of Magic was odd. The fact that the class may have in fact bored its own professor to death didn't seem to faze many as the ghost seemed to have been teaching for several hundred years. Harry wondered how he graded papers. Moreover, the professor's short-term memory seemed lacking as he didn't get a single name correct when calling people out. Transfiguration included the first attempt at magic for many students save those who practiced on their own. Professor McGonagall gave a lecture on many of the principles behind transfiguration for the first part of the class and had everyone try to turn a matchstick into a needle for the second part of class. Hermione and Neville got it on their first try, but Harry only got his matchstick to become slightly silver, which got a confused stare out of both Gryffindors. McGonagall awarded Hermione and Neville 10 house points and Harry 5 points. No one else in class got anything out of the needle. Charms class included another lecture with a promise that magic would start for the next class. Once the trio found themselves back in the empty class, the interrogation began. Hermione accused, "Harry, why didn't you change the matchstick into a needle? You're the one who showed us yesterday." Harry shook his head and said, "Hermione, the quality of the class won't increase if I suddenly show I've mastered the content. I told you before, there is no accelerated program for those who finish early. House points look nice on paper but they have no real use." Neville said, "That shows why you don't care, but not why you're holding back. You said showing you know the stuff won't make the class better, but that doesn't mean you have to pretend to do worse." Harry answered back, "You're right Neville, but you're overlooking something." Hermione jumped to it and asked, "What's that?" Harry shrugged, "I'm Harry Potter and people have wanted me dead before. Showing my skill could make things worse for me, and if there is no incentive to show my skill, I'd rather others think me weak. We already have a teacher actively sabotaging us after all, so dash." "What?" Hermione nearly shrieked in outrage. Harry continued, "A natural stutter only occurs at the beginning of a sentence. Quirrell stutters as much as he can, 100% fake. He doesn't want anyone in his class to progress, which means anyone who wants to learn how to defend themselves against the dark arts will need to practice on their own." Hermione looked horrified that a teacher would be willing to sabotage a student for any reason. Neville said, "I think he's right Hermione. I used to have a stutter and have only gotten over it recently. But I would only stutter when I first tried to say something, not the whole time. Luckily the first year content of Dada wouldn't be difficult to master quickly. It included a few weak curses such as the boogie curse, which gave a bad case of the sniffles, and some jinxes which pushed the target away or made it harder to move. The non-spell content included information about some of the more common dangerous creatures and how to treat a werewolf bite or scratch, along with some magical first aid. Questions on why the teacher was sabotaging the classes were held back for now, and they picked up where they left off on practicing magic and questions on magic theory after finishing their homework. The next day was more of the same, except they had their first potion class. Lily had told Harry that Professor Severus Snape had been a friend of her until he basically had to choose between her and the dark arts, and he made his choice and even became a Death Eater. The man had looked like he'd seen a ghost when Harry showed up, which raised some odd questions. According to his father, the man had also been a known legilimencer for Voldemort. James had Harry learn occlumency, of course, but it seemed redundant. Some part of Harry's gamer power protected his mind from outside influence and even tended to squash strong negative emotions. If that power hadn't stifled his fear, he never would have faced a monster again after his first time dying in the tutorial due to fear of the pain he felt both from the death and the revival. The crooked-nosed professor entered the classroom with billowing robes and hair that had a sheen of grease. He looked over everyone and paused for a moment at Harry, who hadn't bothered to meet the man's eyes, instead looking around the classroom. After giving a short introduction to the subject, he went for the roll call and stopped once he reached Harry. Harry Potter, our newest celebrity, back from the dead. Harry still didn't meet his eyes, simply looking next to him. Legilimency really did need you to meet someone directly in the eyes, which seemed to irritate the professor. He called out, "Look me in the eyes when I'm speaking to you, Potter." Harry let out a sigh at the man's lack of subtlety and reached into his robes to grab some eyeglasses. When he put them on, everyone noticed they had been completely smashed with so many cracks they were impossible to see through. Harry faced in the professor's direction with his eyes hidden behind the glasses and said, "Apologies, Professor." Snickering could be heard from the Gryffindor side of the room, which irritated Snape further. He called out, "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Hermione's hand shot up as she had read the full textbook Magical Drafts and Potions and had it mostly memorized. Harry mutely looked at the professor without answering, as it was obvious the man didn't care if Harry answered or not. The man's sneer deepened and continued, "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane?" Harry was starting to get a little irritated. The man didn't seem to get a hint. Unless someone was either told to learn it before, the only way to already know the answer was to memorize the text 1000 magical herbs and fungi. Hermione did, of course, and Harry had 6 different versions in his inventory, but the fact was, the man was looking for a fight. Harry decided not to play nice. "Did you need me to teach the class for you, Professor? I don't mind, of course, if you have more important things to do than your job." 5 different students nearly snorted while 3 couldn't contain themselves and burst out into full-blown laughter. Hermione was partly scandalized and partly holding back her own laughter. Neville had to cover his mouth while the still unnamed redhead who sat next to him was letting out peals of laughter. Harry figured he could learn the redhead's name if he paid attention to the roll call, but he wasn't nearly invested enough to do so. "Your arrogance is worse than your father's," he sneered. Harry quipped back, "Am I also headstrong like my mother? Guess you didn't know her very well. I've been told I have her eyes, what do you think?" Of course, since the glasses were impossible to see through, the potions professor could not in fact give an opinion on them. 50 points from Gryffindor for talking back, the man roared. Harry shrugged, "If you prefer talking to yourself, I won't say another word to you in this classroom." He made a motion to zip his lips and looked completely unfazed at the point loss. The professor regained control of his emotions and glared at Harry through his broken glasses, which kinda defeated the purpose of glaring. After another moment he returned to roll call, which Harry didn't pay attention to. What he did pay attention to was the timing of the man's emotions, half of which seemed artificial. Although there was real anger at the mention of Lily, the rest of Snape's attitude was pretty much fake. The professor paired the students up and had everyone make a boil cure potion. What he didn't do was allow them to work in silence. At least once a minute he would loudly call out someone for doing something he declared incorrect, while sometimes he would praise a specific bleach blonde student he called Malfoy on the Slytherin side of the class. Harry often felt the man's glare shift his way, and Harry purposefully made a mistake every once in a while that would not lower the quality of his potion but would give the professor something to loudly point out. Whether Harry gave a perfect potion or a half-done one wouldn't affect Harry's future, and although this man didn't have killing intent towards Harry, he wasn't someone Harry would allow to know his actual skill set for now. After criticizing Harry for the umpteenth time, the class finished and Harry put a sample of his and Neville's potion in a test tube. Harry then noticed Snape was going around vanishing the content of all the cauldrons, and Harry quickly scooped another sample into a second test tube and hid it before Snape reached them and vanished their cauldron. Harry whispered something to Neville and gave him the second test tube and lined up to submit his own. When Snape took Harry's, he accidentally dropped it and claimed they would have to receive a 0 for the day. Neville walked up to the professor and said, "That's okay, Professor Snape." Harry said his mom told him how clumsy you were, so we prepared a second sample for you. Several others choked back a laugh, and Snape gave another fake glare at Harry and took the second vial without dropping it this time. After history of magic, herbology, Dada, and dinner, the group returned to the empty classroom they used for practice, and Hermione started to vent. Now that she wasn't seeing teachers through rose-colored glasses, she could recognize bad teaching for what it was. After letting her finish, Harry said, "Although it looks like we'll have to teach ourselves potions as well, don't take it out on Snape." The man was like Quirrell, but instead of pretending to be incompetent, he was pretending to hate all the non-Slytherins and me especially. Neville hesitantly asked, "Are you sure he was pretending?" "Yes," Harry answered with certainty before elaborating. "Real anger builds up while fake anger starts at the max and cools down. He wanted to get a reaction out of me, and he wanted everyone to see him acting like that towards me. That's why he deducted an unreasonable amount of points but didn't give me detention." Hermione asked, "But why?" Harry turned to her and said, "He probably has his reasons, and if we tried, we might be able to guess them. But does it really matter?" Hermione thought back to all the criticisms Snape made towards Harry and knew that all the mistakes Harry made to earn them were intentional. To Harry it didn't matter, and what was ironic was that Harry's offer to teach the class was something he likely could have gone through with if Snape tried to call his bluff. Harry made a list of the potions they would be going over this year, and since the room of requirements couldn't conjure ingredients to practice with, Harry would go over the theory and properties of each ingredient and explain why it worked the way it did with the pair. In this way they could at least mostly get why specific ingredients needed specific preparation for specific uses. They separated afterwards and Harry returned once more to the room of requirements, something he decided to just call the Roar. After meditation and physical exhaustion, Harry headed for the common room and found the nameless redhead waiting for a chess match which Harry gave. During the match, Fred and George showed up and asked if what their brother had told them about Snape's lesson was true. Did the little firstie really offer to teach his class? Did you really ask him if he had something better to do than his job? Harry gave the details while moving some more pieces around and getting a hang on chess. If nothing else, the nameless redhead wasn't bad and Harry had no intention of beating him on purpose until he could steal a few strategies off him. All the first years had astrology at midnight in the observatory, so Harry had no excuse not to play 3 more rounds with the redhead before excusing himself. Astronomy held nothing outside Harry's expectations, and once the class was finished everyone returned to their dorms and went to bed. Although a little shaky, Harry had begun his routine for Hogwarts and could only hope he would survive what was to come. Chapter 7 Halloween Mayhem. The end of October had come and Harry had somewhat settled into his routine. He did his best not to stand out for more than just being Harry Potter, and since his 2 acquaintances were both doing amazing, he was able to hide in their shadows and make it look like his own above-average abilities were due to their association. Neither was happy with that, but after Harry begged them on his knees not to let anyone know he was the smart one, they agreed not to tell others. So far there had only been one incident which threw off Harry's image of a just above average student with help, and that was their first flying class. Harry got the worst broom, and once Harry mounted the thing, it shot up into the air and broke in half, leaving Harry to fall 30 feet from the sky. This wasn't the problem. The problem was that Harry did a shoulder roll on landing and got up without a single visible or measurable injury. If it was another student it would be talked about for a week and forgotten, but as Harry Potter, it was something that simply added to his immortalized legend. Today was the day that the student delegations of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang would arrive at Hogwarts. It was a Saturday, and although most would rather be playing indoors or in some cases, Hermione, doing their homework or studying, every student was made to stand out in the frigid cold and wait until the other schools showed up to show school-wide unity. Weasley, straighten your hat. Ms. Poddill, take that ridiculous thing out of your hair, cried McGonagall as she went row by row to confirm the uniformity of the students. Once ready, she said, follow me please, first years out in front, and lead everyone to the Black Lake. After waiting for a while, Dumbledore said aloud that Beauxbatons had arrived and pointed up. Harry saw what appeared to be a dozen elephant-sized winged horses pulling an enormous carriage. A few of the students unconsciously backed up when the carriage descended for a landing, and the whole group felt the impact of the hoofbeats of the creature's landing. A moment after the carriage came to a halt, a young man came out and opened a set of golden stairs. Dumbledore approached and met the woman who came out and exchanged pleasantries. What surprised most was that she was even taller than Hagrid. A series of young women in powder blue robes left the carriage with an attempted show of grace that was difficult to pull off successfully, with each and every one of them shivering to the bone. Dumbledore had a teacher escort the lot into the castle before they all froze solid, and everyone else continued to wait for Durmstrang to show up. Not wanting to be shown up, it seemed, the Durmstrang delegation showed up in a giant ship which ascended from beneath the surface of the Black Lake, leaving everyone to wonder how it got there in the first place. The students of Durmstrang and their headmaster, who looked like a stereotypical evil warlock, all wore furs and looked far less fragile than their Beauxbatons counterparts. Harry heard the redhead standing a few places down from him. Hey, that's Crumb. According to a magazine in Harry's inventory, Victor Crumb was a student of Durmstrang, yet a professional Quidditch player, one of the best in the world even. He would be in his 7th year and his skill was expected to lead his team to the World Cup once he graduated. Shame his team had no one else to rely on. With their arrival, the whole group returned to the castle into the warmth of the Great Hall. The Durmstrang students chose to sit at the Slytherin table while the Beauxbatons chose to sit with the Ravenclaws. The headmaster introduced his fellow headmasters and told everyone the choosing of the champions would begin after the feast. The food that appeared had a larger variety than normal, which some of the cookbooks in Harry's inventory named as French dishes. Harry himself was watching the new students and checking out their exotic energy. Although there was no level floating above each person's head, the size and brightness of the exotic energy mass within each gave Harry an idea for their magic stats and magic path rank. From Beauxbatons, the strongest contender seemed to be a blonde young woman whose magic seemed more a part of her than normal. This was something he usually only saw in magical creatures. The strongest from Durmstrang was unsurprisingly Victor Crumb, and not by a small margin either. Though if that meant he was good or everyone else from his school was bad, Harry did not know. There were a few possible contenders for Hogwarts, but the strongest sat at the Hufflepuff table. Harry would say he was level 50 with a magic path rank of 9. Harry's own stats after 2 months of school were as follows. Harry Potter. Level 77, age 11. STR 68, AGI 122. Int 250, WIS 250. Luck 10. Warrior path rank 8. Scholar path rank 11. Magic path rank 15. Tech path 7. Harry meditated daily to level up at least once a day and extra on weekends while practicing combat, both magical and non-magical, against the monsters he faced. Teaching Neville and Hermione while studying himself got his scholar path up an impressive amount, and last month Harry finally came up with a rune scheme that protected electronics from exotic energy. It basically used an ordered set of exotic energy and froze it in place around the electronics, forming something of a shield. The frozen shield wouldn't enter the fragile parts and would stop additional exotic energy up to a certain strength from entering. It wouldn't survive anything stronger than a weak spell but would at least not get fried just from ambient energy. Once that was done, Harry added to his routine more time to study computers and electronics. At a few points Harry had to sneak out of Hogwarts to apparate to London and buy some more electronics, but he hadn't been caught so far, which was a win for him and let him advance his tech path as well. Harry waited until the feast was over to see how the tournament participants would be selected so he could ponder on how he would be entered. Two men entered the Great Hall and Dumbledore said, "Let me introduce, for those who do not know them, Mr. Bartemius Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and Mr. Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. They will be joining myself along with Professor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime as the judges for the tournament." Mr. Filch, the strange nearly magicless man, came in with a jewel-encrusted chest and placed it before Dumbledore. Dumbledore gave a few more foreboding warnings before tapping the chest 3 times and opened it to reveal a rather large silver cup. He explained that it was called the Goblet of Fire and would be the impartial judge. He would take it to the entrance hall and draw an age line around it that would prevent any under the age of 17 from approaching it. Once there, he would light it and any who felt themselves up to the challenge would have to write their name on a piece of paper and place it in the goblet. The next day, the goblet would choose 3 names, one of each school, to be contenders for the Triwizard Cup. Once the feast was over, Harry, Hermione, Neville and the still as of yet to be named redhead went to the dorm. The redhead asked, "Harry, are you going to enter your name in it?" Harry shrugged, "Nope, doubt it matters. The goblet will likely spit out my name regardless." Neville said, "Oh yeah, didn't you bet Hermione you'd be entered to compete against your will?" Hermione said, "There is no way you're going to complete. What if Snape or some 7th year enters my name?" Hermione said, "Even if they did, there is no way the goblet would choose a 1st year when 7th years." Her complaint about Harry's lack of skill compared to a 7th year died down when she realized she had no actual idea where Harry's skill level was at. Anyone else, and there was no second thought about it. Harry Potter, on the other hand. The redhead spoke up, "Do you guys hear that?" Harry didn't hear anything, so he paused and turned the background sound up on the menu. Once he unpaused, the sound of massive footsteps echoed from around the corner down the hall. Everyone turned around to go back down the hallway, but the stairs leading up to the hallway decided not to cooperate and twisted away, leading no way to go but forward. A large green monster with a stupid-looking face and a massive wooden club turned the corner and locked eyes with the 4 students. Yup, it was a troll. Harry hadn't fought a troll before, but his racing heartbeat was quickly quelled by the passive mental ability of his gamer power. The others were not so lucky. The redhead started muttering in circles, Hermione was hyperventilating, and Neville was frozen solid. Harry paused the world and walked over to the troll to examine him. The reach of his club would prevent anyone from running past him, and Harry really didn't feel like dying today. Harry returned back to the end of the hall where the stairs had left him and came up with an idea. Harry confirmed the distance and measured it a few times before going over the plan a few more times to be sure. When he was ready, he unpaused and was returned back to his original position. Harry grabbed Neville and the redhead by the robes and said, "Hermione, follow me now, no questions," and dragged them both back to where the stairs were. Hermione was the type to overthink rather than freeze, so she easily adjusted and followed Harry back. The hallway met the stairs at a balcony with a rail that extended further left and right than the hallway, out of sight of the troll. Harry shoved Neville and the redhead into one side and pointed to the other side and told Hermione, "Stay there, don't move, I have a plan, it will work, don't move." Hermione tucked herself into the corner and Harry returned to the hallway where the long strides of the troll had it almost to their position. Harry stood before the troll who swung its club, and Harry paused again to go back and confirm that Hermione wasn't peeking. Luckily she was still crouched down in the corner and Neville had passed out and the redhead seemed to have his eyes shut. Harry unpaused and ducked under the swing before he slipped under the troll's legs. He then cast a slippery jinx on the troll's skin, which caused the ungraceful monster's legs to slip out from its own weight. Lastly, Harry used an overpowered knockback jinx to send the troll down what might as well have been a frictionless hall due to the slippery jinx, where the troll sailed off the stairless deck and down the tower 4 full flights before landing on the bottom. Harry walked over to the edge and peered down at the fallen monster. The creature's exotic energy was circulating around its body, meaning it wasn't dead, but likely wouldn't get up soon. When Harry went back over to Hermione, she reached out and hugged him. The redhead seemed to have seen the troll fly off the balcony and said, "Blimey Harry, what did you do?" Harry shrugged and said, "Slippery jinx and knockback jinx. Made the troll slip and knocked him back. Gravity took care of the rest." Hermione said, "Harry, that was brilliant." He argued back, "Lucky is more like it. Had we been trapped on the 1st floor, that wouldn't have gone so well." Neville got up and said, "What happened?" Hermione looked hesitant to answer before the redhead said, "Harry defeated the troll." Neville's eyes shot up and he exclaimed, "What? That was real? Where is it?" The redhead pointed down the tower where several students and a teacher had now approached the troll, which still wasn't moving. Hermione said, "We should get a teacher." Harry sighed in defeat but didn't argue. 10 minutes later Harry had told everyone what had happened several times. The knockback jinx wouldn't be taught for a few more months but was still considered a first-year spell, while the slippery jinx wasn't taught at all but was around the level of a first-year spell. That being said, the slippery jinx was normally something that targeted the hand, which caused the target's wand to slip from their grip. Casting in a way where the friction of the entire surface of a troll was removed was far beyond the norm. And the knockback jinx was little more than a very hard push and was less effective the heavier something was. The weight of a fully grown mountain troll should have barely budged with such a spell, frictionless surface, or not. Luckily for Harry, Snape was there and more than happy to downplay Harry's achievements as luck, which Harry had no complaints about. Still, before the next morning there was not a single person within the castle who did not know of Harry's single-handed defeat of the troll. Breakfast time included rumors being passed back and forth about who entered their names in the goblet and tales of Harry's epic battle with the troll where he punched it through a wall and sent it flying to the other side of the castle. Harry himself found each retelling more outlandish than the last. What was the point of using first-year spells if people weren't going to bother recalling the details? Should he use Fiend Fire next time? Harry went around the entrance hall so he wouldn't be seen in the same room as the goblet. Some part of him figured if he actually entered his name, the goblet would probably select him as Hogwarts champion. But what if the quest was like a self-fulfilling prophecy where if he didn't hear it, he wouldn't have entered himself thinking he was already destined for it and wouldn't have had to complete? Slightly crazy perhaps, but he still wanted to avoid purposefully entering himself so he could see how his name would come out anyways. This year, Halloween was on a Sunday, and while some students had plans that revolved around sitting in front of a cup all day, Harry actually intended on being productive. Along with Hermione, Harry spent the next several hours in the library. He would look for an interesting book, place it in his inventory and pause, and take as long to go over it as he wanted. The fun part was that he could even look through the restricted section. Each of those books had a spell where should the book be opened by someone without a special permission slip, the book would literally start screaming. However, since books needed to be moved every once in a while, simply taking them off the shelf didn't do anything as long as they were off the shelf too long. This system certainly never took into account an ability to read a book without opening the cover in less than a second. Harry couldn't go to the restricted section often or he'd get caught, but when no one was around he'd walk over to it, remove a book, place it in his inventory, pause, go over it completely, then unpause, remove it and set it back. With practice the book was only off the shelf for 2 seconds. Thanks to his scholar path reaching rank 11, Harry could read and cross-reference material far more thoroughly than he used to be able to. Harry figured he'd have all the unique and important books memorized by February. Once the time for the Halloween feast got close, Harry and Hermione both returned to the Great Hall to watch the selection for the tournament. Hermione saw that Harry was eating with the zen-like acceptance of a death row convict having his last meal and said, "Harry, you are not going to be chosen, all right?" Harry spoke up, "Oh yeah, of little faith. I thought after yesterday you would stop doubting my talent as a trouble magnet. Just because I'm a first year and I didn't go anywhere near the goblet doesn't mean my name won't come out." Neither Harry or Hermione were whispering and Harry heard a few Gryffindors seem to whisper back to back and what seemed to be bets being made. The redhead said, "My brothers tried getting past the age line with an aging potion but it shot them back and they both grew a beard." Harry said, "One of them should keep it so we can tell them apart." The redhead responded, "Nah, even if they did, they'd probably figure out how to switch the beard just to make everyone mistake one for the other." Harry could see the twins doing that. The goblet had been moved to a stand in front of the headmaster's table and the students of both visiting schools entered the hall and waited to the side. Once the feast ended, Dumbledore stood up and said, "Well, the goblet is almost ready to make its decision. I estimate that it requires 1 more minute. Now, when the champions' names are called, I would ask them to please come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber where they will be receiving their first instructions." The headmaster waved his wand around which lowered the brightness of the candles. The goblet of fire was the brightest flame in the hall. After a moment, the flame spit out a paper which Dumbledore caught and named the Durmstrang champion as Victor Krum, to no one's surprise. The next paper that shot out named the Beauxbatons champion Fleur Delacour, the young blonde Harry noticed earlier. When the last paper shot out, a collective breath was held by the entire hall. The Hogwarts champion is Cedric Diggory. While the entire hall turned to uproar, Hermione turned to Harry and gave a silent, knowing, and slightly smug smile. Harry noticed several of the Gryffindors glance at Harry with a bit of an edge. There had in fact been bets placed on him. Harry however noticed the fire hadn't gone out yet. He turned to face Hermione and waggled a finger back and forth signifying, "Not yet." Dumbledore had already started his speech about giving the 3 champions support and his honest hopes for the tournament. He never got to finish his speech as the goblet of fire roared to life once more and spat out a 4th slip of paper before finally going out. Hermione immediately turned to face Harry who gave her an "I told you so" smile. Harry himself felt the exotic energy of the cup attach itself to him in the same moment. Ping. Goblet of Fire contract perk acquired. Conditions: must compete in the 3 tasks of the tournament. Failure to complete conditions will change Goblet of Fire contract perk into Broken contract perk. Goblet of Fire contract perk grants legal adulthood. Harry was surprised that the contract actually connected to him and was more surprised that he was now considered a legal adult. That was something he could use. After a long pause of looking at the singed parchment, Dumbledore called out, "Harry Potter." Harry innocently asked aloud. Yes, headmaster. Dumbledore took a moment to collect himself before adding, Harry Potter, come up here if you please. Harry stood up and said, sir, if this is your idea of a joke, I think I would prefer the one about a troll, a hag, and a leprechaun who all go into a bar. A few nervous chuckles broke the silence. The headmaster gave a weak smile before continuing, I'm afraid this is not a joke, Mr. Potter. Your name has come out of the Goblet of Fire. Please head to the room with your fellow champions. Harry let his head down in defeat and made his way up the hall. He announced aloud, for my next funeral, I like white lilies, before joining his fellow champions in the other room. Chapter 8 Weighing Wands and Slaying Serpents. When Harry stepped through the door, all three champions looked at the tiny first year. Fleur Delacour said, what is it? Does he want us back in ZE Hall? Harry shook his head and said back, no, you're fine, Ms. Delacour. I've been chosen as a sacrificial offering to the gods, so I'll be contributing my death for the entertainment of the masses as the fourth champion. Victor Krum paused a moment before he threw his head back and started laughing hysterically. As a sports star of Europe, he could certainly appreciate a gladiator joke, and coming from such a small student made it all the more absurd. Cedric Diggory did not laugh as he was aware of the rumors of Harry beating a troll the prior night and was surprised at the lack of denial from any of the sources. Harry himself was fit for a first year and could easily pass for a second or third year student, but Harry had clearly not even begun puberty yet, so he was still quite small to the three seventh year students. Cedric even heard a rumor that Harry had once declared that he would likely be forced to compete. Until now he had of course ignored that one. Victor's laughter died when Ludo Bagman entered and stated how miraculous Harry's entry as the fourth champion was. The three other champions looked back at Harry, who once again had his resigned to execution face. Not a moment later Dumbledore and the other headmasters followed by the Hogwarts staff entered the room. Everyone proceeded to argue back and forth about how unfair it was that Hogwarts had two contestants, completely ignoring Harry's highly likely impending death. Snape added his 2 cents, of course. Don't go blaming Dumbledore for Potter's determination to break rules. He has been crossing lines ever since he arrived here. Harry calmly stated back, your confidence in my abilities is overwhelming, Professor. Remember, white lilies. That shut the man up, who was in fact finding it a bit difficult to honestly accuse a mediocre first year of cheating on such a scale. Dumbledore used the lull in the conversation to calmly ask, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? Harry shrugged, if I wanted to commit suicide, headmaster, I would have just asked Professor Snape. He'd probably make it painless. So no, I did not put my name in the Goblet of Fire, and I was nowhere near it today or last night. Even Snape nearly turned green a bit at the blatant accusation that he would be so willing to kill Harry. He couldn't show it, however, and remained stern-faced to the other teachers. None of the teachers could deny Harry had an alibi for the prior night, and this morning had many students keep watch on the goblet and none saw Harry approach it. There was simply no gap he could have used to slip his name into the goblet without witnesses. Harry himself, however, wondered if his name going in the goblet and the troll getting in were coincidences. Maybe one was a distraction for the other? In which case, the likely culprit would be Quirrell. Quite thorough too, Harry had to admit. Place a troll where Harry was likely to encounter it, perhaps spell the stairs to prevent escape, and use the distraction to enter Harry's name in the goblet. Harry was kinda impressed a man with such poor acting talents could plot his murder so thoroughly. Harry was tempted to ask if he could examine the goblet so he could place it in his inventory, but Harry's energy sight along with his new insights into magic pretty much told him how the goblet worked and even what happened to it. The Goblet of Fire's creation predated the Olympics, and the torch of the Olympics was actually an imitation of the goblet. Few knew how it actually worked, but Harry could tell the goblet couldn't connect to someone who didn't have the will to compete. If Harry had never considered or at least slightly desired to be chosen, the last paper would have burned to scrap. As for how it came out, Harry figured Quirrell used the Confindus charm to make the goblet forget there were only 3 schools. Quirrell could have taken Harry's name off a piece of homework and entered it as the only name of a 4th school. Not that it mattered how it was done. As they continued to argue, Fleur Delacour asked Harry, what are ZE white lilies for? Harry shrugged and said, my funeral, obviously. The French champion blanched at that and remained silent while watching the adults and her own headmistress accuse Harry of cheating. Crouch told everyone that a name that comes out of the goblet, regardless of age, would be bound in a magic contract to compete. Breaking that contract would risk Harry's magic. Once they reached the point where they realized further arguing was meaningless, they got back to explaining the first task, which was pretty much nothing. They referenced it would be based on daring, and when they entered they could only bring their wand. Harry wondered if he could transfigure a sack of goodies into a wand and bring that. They also mentioned that Harry wouldn't have to take the end of the year exams, which made his grades this year completely pointless. Harry left the room alongside Cedric Diggory, who asked, you really think you're going to die? Harry answered back, most likely, but then again, it won't be the first time. We'll see what happens. Good luck. Harry split off and returned up the stairs. Paintings were gossiping with each other and a few called out to Harry, which he ignored. When he returned to the dorm he was asked if he was really going to compete, and Harry affirmed he would. Harry then walked over to Hermione and asked, do you know which teacher you're going to prank yet? She yelled, how can you treat this as a joke? Harry smiled back, don't worry too much, the only time I joked was about the white lilies. Worst case scenario, I stop holding back and win the bloody tournament. Hermione looked like she was about to argue, but she held it back for now. She was however determined to learn exactly how strong Harry was, if only for her own peace of mind. A few of the Gryffindors tried to congratulate Harry, which Harry responded to by thanking them and asking them what they would be wearing to his funeral. Harry wanted to make it clear that a first year didn't belong in the Triwizard competition. The next morning, Filch's pet cat Norris was found petrified in front of a girl's bathroom. On the wall next to the petrified cat was the message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware," written in chicken blood. Harry's face turned pale as he remembered one of the requirements of his quest. He first thought the basilisk would be a part of the tournament, but now it seemed a creature that could kill with a look was wandering around without notice. He wasn't worried about himself. A level lost could be regained, though indescribably painful. But no one else would come back if they looked a basilisk in the eye. Harry covertly left school the following Sunday to buy several portable stereo speakers, and after some unusual arrangements he got a recording of the crowing of roosters. He didn't bother putting them in his inventory after he finished inscribing them to be mostly magic-proof, since if he encountered a basilisk he might not have time to pull them out, so he shrunk them and placed them in his pockets. Harry didn't know if the recording would actually kill a basilisk, but if nothing else it would at least drive it away, right? 2 weeks passed by without another basilisk encounter. Harry was in potions class where Snape said, "Today we will be working on antidotes. At the end of class I will poison one of you and we shall test if the antidote works properly or not. Potter, if you have anything against being poisoned, speak up now." The fact that Harry refused to speak a word in his class was at first frustrating for Snape, who would constantly try to provoke a response out of him. Now however he had changed his methods and was quite pleased with the results. Unfortunately for the poison-happy professor, the door opened at that moment and a student Harry didn't recognize said, "Please, sir, I'm supposed to take Harry Potter upstairs." Snape didn't give the student a glance and coolly said, "Potter has another hour of potions to complete, he will come upstairs when this class is finished." The student replied, "Sir, Mr. Bagman wants him. All the champions have got to go. I think they want to take photographs." Very well, Potter, leave your things here. I want you back down here later to test your antidote." The student interrupted, "Please, sir. He's got to take his things with him. All the champions dash." "Very well, Potter, take your bag and get out of my sight." Harry wordlessly got up and childishly waved goodbye to Snape, who pretended, at least Harry thought he pretended, to grind his teeth in frustration. Harry was escorted to a room where he was informed that his wand was going to be weighed and checked that it was fully functional. Harry felt this was going to become very awkward very quickly. Next, a woman wearing bright clothes and too much makeup asked for an interview and didn't give Harry time to decline. It was however amusing when she tried to drag Harry into a broom closet and Harry didn't move though he was less than half her size. Stats were funny like that. Once the woman got it through her head Harry for some reason couldn't be dragged. She decided to just interview him there. "So why did you decide to enter the Triwizard tournament?" Harry realized instantly the type of interview this was going to be. Unfortunately for the reporter, she was facing the son of James Potter, who had been raised on decades, if not longer, of cable television and video games. He answered, "I lost a bet with my godfather and I am a man of my word. I don't welch on my bets." "How do you feel about the tournament?" "Terrified. I can only hope that most of my limbs remain attached and I am still alive at the end of the tournament." "Where have you been for the last year?" "My godfather Sirius Black secretly escaped prison and rescued me from my abusive relatives." "Notorious mass murderer Sirius Black." "That's the one. Not sure if you will be allowed to print that though, since his escape has been really hush-hush. It's thanks to him I'm not dead though. Still irresponsible of him though to make me enter my name if I lost that bet. Guess he didn't think I'd actually get chosen." Dumbledore showed up a moment later but didn't hear what they had spoken about. Seeing his approach let the reporter know the interview was over, so she promptly thanked Harry and left. Dumbledore asked, "I hope you were careful, Mr. Potter." Ms. Skeeter dash. Harry interrupted, is the type who wouldn't give the truth unless it's the juiciest piece of gossip around. "I do hope she forgives my use of imagination and doesn't trust the words of an 11-year-old orphan." Dumbledore became quite confused at this but got the feeling Ms. Skeeter's story would not go the way she wanted. The headmaster escorted Harry to where the other champions were sitting and over to an old, crazy-looking man. Dumbledore introduced the man as Mr. Ollivander and said, "He will be checking your wands to ensure that they are in good condition before the tournament." The strange man could tell the exact details of a wand and seemed alarmingly obsessed with them. He checked over Fleur's, then Cedric's, then Crumb's, giving each a wave and casting a spell. "Good," said Mr. Ollivander, handing Crumb back his wand. "Which leaves Mr. Potter." Harry got to his feet and walked past Crumb to Mr. Ollivander and handed over his wand. The strange man immediately frowned upon touching the wand and said, "Mr. Potter, this isn't the time for jokes, where is your wand?" Harry feigned confusion and said, "Mr. Ollivander, I found that in a trunk in my father's old house and have been waving it since then." Harry took the wand and made a swish and flick motion before casting the levitation charm and causing a stool to float. Dumbledore noticed this and asked, "What could be the problem, Mr. Ollivander?" The odd man took back Harry's wand and said, "Mr. Dumbledore, this is a stick," before handing it to the headmaster. He then said, "I only recently heard about Mr. Potter's return and have been waiting for him for some time, but he has yet to come in for a wand." A number of stares were exchanged and conversations exchanged below hearing level. At least Harry knew that he couldn't transfigure a sack of goodies into a wand and take it into the tasks. Obviously someone had attempted such a thing before, which was why there was a wand weighing prior to the tasks to begin with. Bagman stated that after the wand weighing, a wand could not be changed, which meant if Harry didn't have a wand now, it was against the rules for him to use one during the tasks. Dumbledore immediately offered to give Harry his own wand, but Bagman said that each champion's school could not aid them, and Dumbledore giving Harry his wand would certainly be considered aiding, meaning it was not allowed. When the other competitors heard this, each was trying to figure out where they could buy white lilies and what they would wear to the funeral. Things got a little hectic the next week when a Muggle-born student was found petrified next to an equally petrified ghost. Harry knew that had the ghost not been there, the Muggle-born student would have died. Harry couldn't gamble on other students getting lucky on their own encounter, so it was time to slay a basilisk. Some of the more ancient books he found did include the Legends of the Chamber of Secrets, which seemed to be built under the Black Lake. The basilisk could likely come and go through the pipes, but Harry had no way to access them and the entrance remained mostly hidden. Okay, Harry had already seen the concentration of exotic energy coming from the sink in the bathroom next to where they found Filch's cat. He was mostly stalling since he didn't want to die of something stupid. The next Saturday Harry told Hermione and Neville he would be doing personal study for the rest of the day and headed off to the bathroom. The moderately perverted nature of the ghost who resided there did not help the atmosphere. Harry said, "Open," in Parseltongue, which caused the sink to shift and open. Harry jumped down, which led to another slide that took him below the Black Lake. Harry had the background noise meter of his settings hiked up to 10 and slowly made his way through the dust and bones. When Harry found a cast-off skin, he was more than a little surprised he could shove the whole thing into his inventory. Harry wondered how that worked. The skin and what little Harry knew of basilisks told Harry this one was likely over 1,000 years old, perhaps bred by Salazar Slytherin himself. Harry found another door that he opened with Parseltongue and entered the chamber beyond. The chamber was thankfully empty, though the magic on the giant face at the end of the room told Harry it likely opened up when addressed. In that case, Harry had time. Harry removed the half-dozen stereo speakers from his inventory and spread them around. Once finished, Harry analyzed the structure of the exotic energy and found what was basically the password. Harry shouted, "Speak to me, Salazar Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four," in Parseltongue, which engaged the face to open. Harry closed his eyes and used only his energy sense. The giant snake that came out was at least 60 feet long. Harry pressed the play button on the remote in his pocket and every speaker loudly called out the sound of crowing roosters. The snake hissed in pain but recognized Harry was the source. It smashed its head at Harry, who jumped out of the way. The basilisk opened its mouth and struck out but missed only due to disorientation. Harry recognized from the beast's energy that the sound was definitely harming it but not enough to kill it on its own. It was 1,000 years old after all. Harry conjured a spear and slashed the beast. Although basilisk hide was highly resistant to magic, it was only mostly resistant to weapon damage, and Harry's sharp spear and fast swing was enough to break the serpent's skin, causing it to cry out in pain and anger. It backed up and swung its tail at Harry, who used the spear to vault above the swung, which smashed violently into the wall. Harry conjured another spear and taunted the beast by getting closer. The basilisk was not considered the king of serpents without reason, and Harry's taunt caused the great beast to strike Harry with its fangs. Harry positioned himself and stabbed his spear through the snake's mouth. However, before it could penetrate far enough, the shaft of the spear broke and the rest of the conjured spear faded. The basilisk reared back and flailed about faster than Harry had time to dodge, sending him flying across the floor. A fourth of Harry's health vanished, which made Harry instantly regret not putting more points in STR, since that increased his physical defense. Harry ducked another tail swipe, looking to tear his head off his shoulders, and conjured another spear. The massive snake faced Harry once more and gave a repeat performance of trying to bite him but getting stabbed in the mouth. The spear snapped again, but Harry knew it was coming this time and was able to dodge the follow-up attack. At this rate, Harry would need 5 or 6 more stabs or 1 lucky shot, but the basilisk only needed a single lucky shot. The continued blaring of crowing roosters caused the ancient creature enormous pain, which was the only reason it lacked its usual patience that made it so deadly. The longer the fight went, the more it would get used to the pain, however. But the basilisk wasn't the only one learning. Harry had never gone an entire fight relying only on his energy sense, and now he was kicking himself for it. Harry was beginning to notice that before the giant magical beast moved, the flow of exotic energy would shift around. Harry was starting to figure out how to predict the snake's movements from this alone. Mostly, he wasn't an expert in snake biology after all. Harry's next conjured spear wasn't a light one as the prior spears had been. This one was solid metal with a spearhead that was thicker than normal. It was in fact too thick to pierce deeply into flesh. Unless it pierced a location there was already a hole. Harry concentrated with all he could and stood before the snake. Harry bent his knee and dropped the tip of the spear, feigning weakness and injury. Though struck twice before, the basilisk's instincts couldn't stop it from striking at that moment. Harry felt the energy in the creature's muscles burst out, and in that moment Harry launched himself forward and drove the spear up. He didn't piece the exact spot of his prior 2 shots, but the roof of the beast's mouth had already been compromised, and thanks to the strength of the strike the spear successfully shattered the roof of the snake's mouth and pierced into the brain, silencing the millennial-old serpent for good. Unfortunately for Harry, his plan had a minor setback. "You have been poisoned with basilisk venom." The spear went further into the skull than Harry anticipated, nearly piercing through the other side of the head. Those fangs Harry had been so careful to stay away from using the length of his spear shaft had pierced his arm. Harry felt the poison reduce his health without signs of stopping. Soon his body's integrity would be compromised and he would dissolve into particles of magic and lose a level. It was certainly going to hurt. Suddenly a mass of exotic energy and another form of energy Harry didn't recognize flashed into existence next to him. It took the form of a thin orange and red turkey-shaped bird. A phoenix? The phoenix walked over to Harry and tilted its head over the wound and produced 3 teardrops which fell into the wound which had yet to close. Basilisk venom neutralized. You have gained the perk poison immunity from having a neutralized form of the strongest poison running through your veins. Harry raised an eyebrow and turned to the phoenix and said, thank you. The phoenix nodded and trotted away before bursting once more into flames and leaving him alone. Once Harry was no longer dying, something rather odd happened. Harry felt the mass of dispersing exotic energy that filled the basilisk suddenly converge on him. You have leveled up. You have gained the perk instant death immunity from absorbing the essence of a basilisk's eyes. Harry looked over the details of his new perk and wondered if this meant he could shrug off the killing curse. He could still be crushed by a boulder, but any effect that simply caused instant death wouldn't work on him anymore. That was useful. Harry thought it was quite the windfall, but he did remember that Hell Mode did come with fabulous prizes. After recovering his strength, Harry got up and touched the basilisk on instinct. The entire beast was somehow dragged into his inventory but not as a giant snake carcass. Instead of a single inventory slot showing dead basilisk, there were inventory slots filled with basilisk skin, slots filled with basilisk venom and basilisk blood somehow already in vials, and slots with basilisk meat, basilisk bones, and basilisk fangs. Harry didn't find any basilisk eyes in his inventory, but that didn't surprise him. His combat strategy revolved around leaving the eyes undamaged so he could use them later, but their essence which contained their value seemed to have been absorbed by Harry. Considering how useful that perk would be, he wasn't going to complain. Though the eyes were useless, the skin still had properties to resist exotic energy. Harry was tempted to take it somewhere to make armor, but decided against it for now. It would be better if he started on a crafter path, and once it was strong enough Harry could make something himself without wasting it. At this point Harry likely would have left if the basilisk hadn't smashed a wall revealing a secret corridor. Yup, going down there. Harry hadn't noticed the wall with energy sense, meaning the path was likely hidden through a mechanism rather than magic. Harry lit the torches in the room, which seemed to be a private study. Harry almost gleefully proceeded to loot the library into his inventory. Yup, it was Salazar's. Harry silently thanked the dead man before leaving. Chapter 9: Toying with Dragons. The morning of the first task finally came around and breakfast was filled with conversations and bets. The redhead Harry played chess with said his older brother worked with dragons and sent him a letter that 4 dragons were being sent to Hogwarts. Harry wondered how many older brothers the boy had. This did at least clue Harry in that the first task involved dragons, which gave him time to prepare a few plans. The only interesting thing to happen since Harry's basilisk encounter was the addition of the newspaper that had Harry's interview. Luckily Harry's lies had been strange enough for the woman to not change much except for some heavy exaggeration on Harry's emotional state. The entire article had been mostly about Harry, as, officially at least, that was the first interview ever obtained for Harry Potter. It included details mentioned about Harry's supposed life before and hinted that Harry mentioned that his godfather was both responsible for Harry's vanishing for a year and his entry into the tournament. However, it only gave vague clues as to the identity of said godfather. It also included several paragraphs of quotes which Harry thought impressive, as he only gave 4 lines of dialogue. Harry at least appreciated that those lines were in fact included. The story at least went in the direction Harry intended. It gave an outline of a young child way over his head with the weight of the wizarding world crashing down on his shoulders. When questioned about the story, Harry would laugh and tell everyone he'd never met the woman, though he appreciated her imagination. Some had doubts, but when Harry mentioned that his godfather was Sirius Black and that he was in Azkaban, no one took the article seriously anymore. Several students, especially that bleach-blonde Slytherin Snape seemed to treat as royalty, attempted to insult Harry or demean him on several encounters. Harry would simply ask if any of their parents would contribute their own funds to Harry's funeral and what they intended to wear and if they were going to get white lilies or something else. When Harry didn't bother denying that he was going to die, they didn't really have much more to work with. That and the fact that the first-year blonde, Mofo? Yeah, Mofo was squeamish, so when Harry started describing the possible gruesome ends he was likely to face with a flat, emotionless tone, the blonde would usually back away and find somewhere to heave into a bucket. Harry wondered how many purebloods would retain their sanity if forced to watch a day or 2 of television. Simpsons' Treehouse of Horrors, anyone? The classes of the second half of the day had been cancelled and everyone was waiting at the Great Hall. McGonagall later showed up and said Harry was due in the stadium for the first task. Harry nodded and said to the Great Hall, "We who are about to die, salute you." Harry wondered if defeating a dragon would be easier or harder than slaying a basilisk, but since dragons weren't artificially created creatures with such bizarre weaknesses, Harry figured the dragon would be harder. Harry was taken to a tent near the stadium that had been set up over the last 3 weeks. Within the tent Harry met his 3 fellow champions and Ludo Bagman, who explained their first task was to get a golden egg and they would have to face a thing which would be decided by pulling it out of a bag. Harry went last and pulled a very small animated Hungarian horntail. Snatching an egg from a nesting dragon was not the worst-case scenario Harry had in mind, but it really wasn't that far off. It was not, however, impossible if he used a few tricks and showed off a little of his skill. Suddenly Harry had a really stupid idea which caused an unstoppable grin to appear on his face. Ping. Warning, taking items out of the inventory during a task constitutes cheating. Taking items other than a wand into the first task constitutes cheating. Cheating will cause Goblet of Fire perk to change to Broken Contract perk. It seemed the system thought his idea was no good. What about? Harry thought of a slight alteration to his really stupid idea. No warning popped up this time. The plan wasn't all that different, it just required him to use the summoning charm. It would reveal he could use a 4th-year spell, but Harry doubted that would be what people paid attention to once Harry was done. The tent itself was not monitored, so Harry snuck out and took all the items he needed out of his inventory and set them near the tent where no one would notice them. Once the time came, Harry was escorted to the entrance. The fact that the man escorting him was asking for forgiveness and pleaded with Harry not to haunt him showed how much confidence the general audience had for his chances. The open area had various levels of terrain, and just on the other side of a rock was Harry's dragon. The exotic energy Harry could sense off the thing greatly eclipsed the basilisk which answered his question from earlier. Then again, it could have been that the basilisk was weakened after a few centuries of hibernation, so comparing the two might not be fair. In either case, Harry found a place to hide and watched the dragon through his senses. Luckily, the dragon wasn't investigating him. Harry was using the masking technique he usually used to prevent his exotic energy from destroying electronics, which basically meant his magic wasn't leaking. Harry's various libraries all told him dragons could sense magic for no other reason than the fact that dragons preferred to eat food that contained magic. The hard thing, however, was that the dragon would sense when he cast one of the only 2 spells he was going to use, as the masking technique couldn't be used while casting magic. Oxio controller, he called out. The black controller Harry set outside the tent launched off the ground and flew towards the stadium and into Harry's hand. Harry prepared himself for the dragon's inevitable attention, which never came. Harry suddenly remembered that for some reason his magic was invisible. He still didn't know why. Something to find out later. Even when Harry fully removed the masking technique, the dragon's attention didn't turn to his direction. A number of the audience was impressed that Harry used the summoning charm, but perhaps a dozen or less of the audience had any idea what he had summoned. The remote control was not a simple store-bought one, but one Harry built and designed himself using a kit. Several kits, actually. It controlled not 1, but 7 different heavy-duty electric helicopters. The remote was half the size of a keyboard and twice as thick. It had 5 different joysticks, 3 knobs, 5 switches, and 5 buttons. Even a Muggleborn would likely have no idea how to use it, but it was ideal for the mayhem Harry was about to bring. For a few minutes nothing happened. The dragon's chain was long enough for it to reach half the arena near the eggs, but unless attracted elsewhere it wouldn't leave the area close to the nest. Suddenly a whirring sound approached and 6 different dog-sized RC helicopters flew into the arena. Each had 2 shopping bag-sized sacks strapped to them. A 7th helicopter flew over from a different side of the stadium. This was Harry's special one, which was only cat-sized and ran silent. None of them had more than a single spell's worth of magic, so though the dragon heard them approach, wasn't too interested in them. The 7th one came to Harry, who cast his 2nd spell on a sponge tied to a long string to the helicopter. The sticking spell. Harry piloted it back into the air and had the other 6 approach the dragon in formation from a few different directions. The dragon was getting annoyed and breathed fire at one, which promptly exploded with a loud bang. That got the dragon's attention. Though it was just the flour Harry stuffed in the sacks that flash fired, it made the dragon classify the flying objects as things which couldn't get close to its nest. The helicopter's smooth hovering ended at that point and they started moving around very fast left and right. One flew right at the egg batch, which earned the dragon's fury. The Hungarian horntail was not known as one of the nastiest dragons around without reason. The dragon swung its tail at the chopper, but the mechanical toy swerved in a spiral and dodged the strike. The dragon's ire had reached its limit and it jumped at the helicopter and crushed it with its jaws. The 4 remaining helicopters the dragon could see were flying around and 2 charged at the dragon, thus challenging its authority. The dragon leapt away from the nest to destroy the remaining helicopters, giving Harry the chance he needed now that its attention was away from the eggs. While simultaneously flying his 4 distractions around the arena, Harry flew the silent chopper above the nest and carefully lowered the sponge with the sticking charm on a string down. The area of the nest was enclosed, so Harry didn't have to deal with any wind, so it was basically a very complicated and moderately dead claw game. The sponge landed on the golden egg and Harry rose the helicopter into the air, lifting the egg with it, causing Harry to silently thank the heavens the egg didn't seem to be that heavy. The reason Harry was able to aim so well was his liberal use of pausing. He'd pause, walk over as close to the egg group as he could and check the accuracy of the sponge before unpausing and making an adjustment. The silent chopper delivered the egg to Harry, who took the lighter than he thought egg off the sponge and flew the very expensive toy back into the air. Harry then flew all the remaining helicopters at the dragon in a group and charged them forward to their doom. Seeing the whole flock line up, the dragon let loose a storm of flame, turning the entire group into ashes with an impressive explosion. Harry quietly took the egg and his controller and returned to the exit. Each of those toys cost several £100, but it was certainly worth it. The man at the gate saw Harry with the egg and looked like he'd swallowed a fly. Harry figured the man didn't expect to see Harry return. Harry had to clear his throat to get the stunned man to register that he was supposed to open the gate and let Harry out of the arena. The announcer eventually realized the golden egg was missing from the nest, and when he called it out, the audience exploded into a frenzy. Very few people appreciated what Harry had done, and plenty of them had no idea he used Muggle toys to do it. A minute or so later, McGonagall showed up, only now noticing Harry had already left and gotten his egg. "Mr. Potter, are you all right? What were those things?" She was more than a little relieved that not only was Harry not dead, he didn't have a single injury despite getting the most vicious dragon. Harry pointed at his controller and said, "I've spent the last few weeks practicing the summoning charm and summoned this Muggle toy." He showed the controller that was able to use Muggle means to control the other flying Muggle toys. "Wouldn't that be against the rules?" she asked worriedly. If Harry cheated, he would face the consequences. Harry shook his head and said, "Nope, the rules said I can't bring anything but a wand into the task. There is no rule against summoning outside tools and using things outside the arena." Harry used a levitation charm at a nearby chair to pick it up and set it down to prove his magic wasn't affected. Mr. Bagman showed up a moment later and repeated McGonagall's question, "Mr. Potter, can I ask what you did? I seem to have missed it." Harry explained once more, "I used magic to summon some complicated Muggle toys and used them to distract the dragon while I used another Muggle toy to retrieve the egg. I still have my magic, so none of that was against the rules." The head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports looked intrigued. "Those were Muggle toys? Fascinating. I've heard rumors that the Muggles had some rather sophisticated toys, but I've never seen one work before." Harry nodded and said, "You wouldn't. Magic makes Muggle toys break or act weird. I made those toys myself so they could work around magic." This was true. In order to finally get his Crafter Path rank, Harry had to make something, but he couldn't just buy and assemble from a kit. Sure, he did that at first, but since it didn't work, he had to spend almost a whole weekend using the parts from several kits and some extras to assemble his remote control. He also had to use a computer to write his own software for the helicopters. There was no actual way a single controller could manually operate a half-dozen helicopters perfectly, so he actually wrote 20 or so different programs onto his controller that would do most of the detailed stuff on its own. Bagman looked impressed and said, "You controlled them, yes? Why did you fly them at the dragon in the end?" "Because I challenged a dragon, and if they left, the dragon would remain angry and would be harder to handle later." Bagman hadn't considered this, but it was true all the same. The Hungarian horntail seemed quite pleased with itself after destroying the toys, and for such an aggressive dragon, it had been nowhere near as riled up as the other contestants left their dragons at the end of their tasks. Of course, the actual reason was that Harry didn't want the rune schemes he set into the choppers to be examined by others. The helicopters were a loss to be sure, but 95% of the work Harry had put into this project had gone into the controller. The helicopter drones were just assembled and engraved. The controller, on the other hand, was where he put the real work into. After a few more clarifying questions, the man left Harry to return to the judges' panel. Sure, Harry hadn't used magic beyond the summoning charm, and the use of Muggle toys did go against the spirit of the tournament if not the letter. But on the other hand, Harry was 11 years old and had been set against a dragon. The head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports had in fact assembled 20 dragon wranglers on standby once Harry had been incapacitated to save his life if possible, which, as long as he was unable to continue, was not against the rules, though he would of course not be scored well and wouldn't get the clue for the next task. Harry was quickly accosted by the school nurse, who for the third time this year checked him over to find no injuries. The nurse was more than a little skeptical at this first year's level of being danger prone, yet after falling from a broom, defeating a troll, and stealing an egg from a nesting dragon, he still didn't have a single injury. He returned to the tent from before, where he had to await the judges' scoring, and was met with the disbelieving eyes of the other 3 contestants, all of which were injured or had damaged clothes except for him. Harry didn't see what they did, but since Harry was last, they all saw what he did. Cedric shook his head and said, "I don't know whether to be impressed or ashamed, Potter." Harry cocked an eyebrow and Fleur answered the unasked question in a French accent. Mr. Diggory transfigured a stone into a dog for a distraction, but the dragon lost interest and shot fire at him. Harry did notice the orange burn paste over his fellow student's face, but was polite enough not to stare. Fleur's dress also appeared quite singed. Crumb said, "The 7th flyer was silent and your dragon didn't notice it. Even I only noticed because I am Seeker and I saw it carry egg on string. Why was it silent but not the rest?" Harry wasn't surprised someone spotted the last one. It wasn't like he made it invisible or anything. That was another project altogether. He thought of the best way to answer someone who likely didn't know any Muggle terms, but as the man was a Seeker, he likely knew a lot about brooms. Harry said, "The last one was a different model. It could not go as fast or as far, but it could go quietly." They asked a few more questions and exchanged stories. Fleur, it seemed, used a powerful spell to put her dragon to sleep. It mostly worked, save the dragon's flaming snore singed her dress. Crumb actually fired a spell at the dragon's eye to blind it, but the dragon crushed some of its eggs in the confusion. That would have worried Harry had he not felt that the eggs were all fake. How they convinced a dragon to guard a nest of fake eggs, though, he didn't know. The scoring came out with Cedric in first place with 44 points, Crumb in second place with 40, and Fleur with 39. Harry was in last place with 30 because Crumb's headmaster gave him 0 points, while Crouch and Fleur's headmistress gave him 6 apiece. Dumbledore gave him 8 and Bagman gave him 10. Harry wondered if Bagman had bet on Harry's victory. The moment Harry left the tent, Hermione ran past Neville and straight for him before almost shouting, "Why didn't you tell me you were going to use RC helicopters? I thought my hair would turn grey watching the other students face those dragons worrying about you." Harry smiled at his friend's concern and easily admitted, "I came up with the idea at the last minute, so even I didn't know. It was only when they told us we had to retrieve an egg did I come up with that idea." Hermione shook her head for a moment to get her bearings before asking, "How did you get Muggle electronics to work here?" "I brought a calculator which didn't even turn on when I took it out of my bag on our first day. A side project I've been working on. Didn't think it'd be that useful. Wonder if I can do the same for the next 2 tasks." Neville chipped in his 2 cents. "Not a bad idea. You were the only one who didn't get hurt, so a repeat performance or 2 wouldn't be bad. You won't get the highest score and you won't win the tournament, but you will survive." Hermione only took a moment to consider this before saying, "He's right. Survival is the most important." Harry noticed a magical being approaching and turned to see Rita Skeeter show up with a predatory smile. "Congratulations, Harry," she said, beaming at him. "I wonder if you could give me a quick word? How did you feel facing that dragon? How do you feel now about the fairness of the scoring?" Harry paused for a few minutes to consider the best way to address the witch. After coming up with the craziest believable story he could, he unpaused and said, "Of course I don't mind, Ms. Skeeter. I almost couldn't breathe when I saw that dragon. Everyone kept telling me before entering how it was the biggest, meanest, nastiest one, so I was terrified. I don't know how fair the scoring was, but other than Mr. Bagman and Headmaster Dumbledore, I don't think the others had any idea what I actually did or how impressive it was, so they scored on their ignorance." Skeeter took a look at her quick quill notes to confirm the exaggerations they jotted down at least had the pertinent details. She continued, "About that, why did you use Muggle toys in a wizard tournament and why do you think that was impressive?" Harry figured the woman wanted to write down that Harry was looking down on the tournament and that he was spitting in the face of tradition and yada yada. Nothing Harry said or didn't say would stop her from writing that, but Harry could redirect who she said that about. Harry said, "It was actually my godfather's idea. He's a terrible prankster and told me I had to use Muggle toys for the competition. I told him it was impossible, but he told me to find a way. The reason it was impressive is because no one has ever applied wizard magic to fancy Muggle toys before. No one. I'm the first. It wasn't cheating either. A sword is a Muggle toy, but if you cast magic on it, it is a magic tool. Those toys were the same. If they weren't, I couldn't have used them since everyone knows Muggle toys don't work around magic." A small group of teachers was heading towards them, so Skeeter thanked Harry and parted. Hermione used the moment before the teachers got there and said, "You did tell that woman those lies about Sirius Black?" Harry said, "Yup." At this point Neville had to fight to hold back his laughter. Professor McGonagall saw Harry and said, "The headmaster would like to have a word with you, Mr. Potter." Harry nodded and followed her. He had been wondering when this would happen. The silent awkwardness of the walk back to the castle was broken when the professor said, "I'm pleased to see you made it out in one piece considering how little confidence you showed earlier." Harry shrugged. "If I told anyone I wasn't going to die, they'd call me a liar, a fool, or accuse me of being in denial. I was just saving myself from being insulted until after I survived my imminent death." McGonagall didn't really have a response to that, so the silence resumed until they had entered the castle and made their way up to the headmaster's office. The ancient wizard noticed their arrival and said, "Thank you, Minerva, you can return. Mr. Potter, please sit." Harry sat on the chair before the man's desk and for a moment neither said a word. Dumbledore broke the silence first. "This would be our first meeting, yet up until now I've done so much damage to your life, Harry, and I cannot ask you to forgive me. I tried to correct my mistakes, I wanted to keep my distance, allow you to live your own life, but it seems such is more difficult than I first had hoped." Harry resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the obviousness of that last part, but it did answer Harry's questions. The man did, and rightly so, consider himself responsible for Harry's death. Dumbledore moved to open a drawer and took out a silver cloth and a wand. He said, "This is, or was, a cloak of invisibility that belonged to your father. And this was the Elder Wand. 2 of the 3 Deathly Hallows of Legends." Harry quickly went over the tale of the 3 brothers. A copy of the Beetle and the Bard was in the Potter library. His father did in fact tell Harry about his family cloak, but for some reason never mentioned its location, as if he didn't intend for Harry to get it. Harry decided to ask the question the headmaster was waiting for, was, "Yes, Harry. On that terrible night last year, this wand lost its power and this cloak no longer rendered its wearer invisible. The 3rd Hallow, the one said to be capable of bringing those from the other side back to this realm, I suspect has also lost its power. And I have my suspicions why." Harry was certainly interested in this, so he waited for the old man to continue. The headmaster said, "Harry, when you summoned your Muggle invention, I nearly cried out in terror and could only wait until the dragon noticed where you were. But it didn't. It wasn't until that moment that I noticed that your magic appears to be invisible to the senses of others. And then there is the fact that it is so simple for you to cast magic, powerful magic I suspect, without a wand. And of course there is your remarkable return from the other side. Invisible magic, magic that can be cast without a wand, and the gift of returning from the other side. You see where I am going with this, Harry?" Harry was curious to know where Dumbledore's certainty that Harry had died was coming from, but Harry supposed the man may have had his ways, which was why he knew that Harry had died, which meant Harry had returned from death. As for the implications, it was certainly interesting. The power of the Deathly Hallows had vanished when Harry died and seemed to become a part of him. Invisible magic? It could still damage electronics, which meant that his magic would still affect things, but it just couldn't be sensed actively or directly. Indirectly, however, it could be. Something to consider. It certainly explained why he didn't need a wand. Harry asked, "So what now?" Dumbledore shook his head. "I would be willing to personally teach you if not for the Goblet of Fire. It would take my magic if I tried to tutor you this year, something I would not regret if I could help you, but I am far too old and would not last long enough without magic to teach you much if I tried." Harry thought on it for a moment and asked, "Can I borrow your library for a week?" Dumbledore's brows rose on that statement and considered it. However, a moment later he let a small frown followed by an amused smirk. He said, "As it is my personal library, granting my permission to loan any book would constitute assistance and risk my magic. Therefore if you ask," he said, emphasizing the word, "I cannot allow it. Now if you excuse me, I have to meet with some of my fellow headmasters." Dumbledore twirled his wand and cast a petrification charm on the portraits in the room. He then got up and said, "You may rest here as long as you wish, and on an unrelated note, if you come across any book of my private collection around the castle, please hand them to Professor McGonagall when you can and she will ensure I get them back. My memory is not what it used to be and I don't recall if they have gone missing or not, so do keep a lookout for them in case they have." A moment later and Harry was alone in the headmaster's office. Harry decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth and proceeded to nab every book from the headmaster's shelf. Stealing certainly didn't qualify as assistance rendered. Once his inventory was stocked, Harry returned down to his dorms where there had been a party waiting for him, congratulating him on not dying. As he had the lowest score, Harry figured that was just about the best thing they could think of congratulating him on. The nameless redhead handed Harry the golden egg he had forgotten at the tent and Harry decided it would be best not to question why the redhead had it. Time to see what the clue for the next stage was. Chapter 10 Return of the Marauders. A week after the first task brought forth 3 problems of different types, but unignorable all the same. The first was that there was a Christmas ball and which Harry had to attend. He asked Hermione as the only girl of his age he knew well, and after flustering for a few minutes with some excuses which ended in Harry promising to get her address, she accepted. She was going home for the holidays, but Harry begging on his knees and promising bribes of her choice of books for Christmas presents had successfully convinced her. The second, and slightly larger problem was the details of the second task. The egg once opened had a recording of a shrieking sound. According to a few books Harry knew, the only species that sounded like that were banshees and mermaids above water. Once submerged, the clue became audible and Harry figured he would be given an hour to find something, or someone, taken and placed in the Black Lake. Hermione and Neville both blanched at the idea and said they didn't want to be hostages, even fake ones. The third, and comparatively largest problem was the issue of the unidentified animagus hiding in the dorm. The youngest redhead brought out his rat and Harry saw it for the first time that year during the party. The exotic energy it contained was certainly that of a wizard. Harry hadn't noticed it before because it was such a weak wizard he thought it was one of his classmates of his year. If it was anything else, this problem would not rank higher than the other two, but Harry's father told him that Peter Pettigrew, the man who actually sold him out to Voldemort, was a rat animagus. The fact that the redhead's pet was missing a toe sealed the deal. All 3 problems required a large amount of preparation. Harry would have to ask McGonagall for permission to head to Hogsmeade with Hermione as he heard there was an excellent tailor there, but no one below 3rd year was usually allowed to go. As for the second task, Harry decided to continue the theme of Muggle toys. He first considered submersible drones, but the drones wouldn't be able to do much even if they found a person. Harry decided to go for broke and just get a personal submersible vehicle for himself and outfit it with extras. However, likely to prevent cheating or exploration prior to the event, Harry figured sometime before the second task, the Black Lake would be closed off. The task was in February, so just to be safe, Harry would have to acquire and outfit a sub, then transport it secretly to the Black Lake in a place it could be hidden, all before January. The last problem was the most delicate. Harry discreetly borrowed an owl and sent a letter to his Gringotts account manager that Peter Pettigrew had been found alive and asked for arrangements to be made for the freeing of his godfather. He already received a reply instructing him to capture the rat in a week and to get Amelia Bones involved as Sirius was her betrothed. And now Harry found himself in front of the star of Hufflepuff, Cedric Diggory, and asking, "Would you be able to get Susan Bones? There is a matter I need to speak with her about." Cedric thought on it for a moment before answering back, sure. "Oh yeah, have you figured out the clue yet?" "Yeah, it's Mermish. Open the egg underwater. Basically someone we each care about will be taken as a fake hostage and thrown into the Black Lake and we'll have an hour to rescue them. My Muggle toys don't do underwater, so I'm still thinking up ideas." Diggory was more than a little surprised Harry not only easily figured it out, but was willing to give the summary to him. He'd check it out himself of course, but having 3 full months to prepare certainly helped him. A few minutes later Susan Bones, a short but cute redhead, came out of the dorms. "You wanted to see me, Potter?" Harry nodded and said, "This is going to get very complicated, so don't jump to conclusions before I'm finished. First, what do you know of your aunt's relationship with Sirius Black?" She looked offended for more than just a moment but held her tongue about why Harry was asking such a personal question for now. "She doesn't speak of him much, but what happened really hurt her." Harry nodded. From what I've seen of the arrest records, Sirius literally shouted, "I killed Lily and James," to the sky, which seemed to be enough for everyone to simply skip giving him a trial, and he was sent directly to Azkaban. Susan nodded. More than a few knew that Sirius never had a trial, but there were over a dozen Aurors cited as witnesses to his confession, so it didn't seem to matter back then. Harry continued. The reason he said that was because it was his idea to change the secret keeper from himself to Peter Pettigrew. Turns out Peter was the traitor, and if Sirius hadn't suggested the swap, my parents might still be alive. Susan scowled at Harry because it was far more likely this was a cruel prank at her aunt than it was the truth. Harry noticed this and said, "I wouldn't bring this up if I didn't have evidence. Pettigrew is alive, and I know where he is." Her scowl lessened to a degree before she asked, "And what do you want me to do?" "Contact your aunt and bring her here without raising alarms. Once here, I swear I will bring her directly to Pettigrew. I don't know if he will be armed or not, but he won't be expecting to get caught." There were of course several ways to contact Amelia Bones, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, without going through her niece. But they were all about as subtle as calling a fire truck by pulling the fire alarm. Susan asked a few more questions and Harry answered what he could. She said she would send her aunt a letter and bring her here in an hour. Harry had chosen Saturday for this plan simply because the redhead with the pet rat usually spent it playing games with their other roommates, and the rat seemed to be caged up during this time. Harry stayed in the Great Hall with a book on runes laid out at the Gryffindor table while Susan waited at the other table. An hour passed and the doors of the Great Hall opened to reveal a slender red-headed woman wearing an Auror's uniform flanked by two others wearing the same uniform. Harry walked right up to her and introduced him. "Ms. Bones, thank you for coming. I'm Harry Potter." The woman's passive face arched an eyebrow. The Daily Prophet articles recently were most confusing as they claimed Sirius Black had secretly escaped and was responsible for Harry's vanishing act a year prior while everyone thought he was dead. The Post First Task article also claimed it was Black's idea to use Muggle toys to complete the task. Amelia was uncomfortable reading those articles as she knew they could not be true and also knew that Sirius would have enjoyed reading them himself. That last realization truly hurt. The head of the DMLE said, "I do hope you understand the severity of your claim, Mr. Potter. One way or another I will be taking someone to my holding cells today, and if a word of what my niece has written is untrue, I can promise that someone will be you." Both Aurors flanking Madame Bones flinched at her scowl, which wasn't even directly at them. Harry remained unfazed, which Ms. Bones noticed either meant he was a very good liar, or perhaps. Harry said, "I understand, Ms. Bones. Please follow me and I'll explain on the way." Harry led the group up to the Gryffindor Tower with Susan and a few others in tow, wondering what was going on. Harry explained aloud for everyone along the way, "According to a letter I found, Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper. It was Sirius's idea. A giant prank on you-know-who and the Death Eaters. If a secret keeper is killed, those who were given the secret become secret keepers themselves. Sirius knew he would die before giving up his friends' lives, so he told everyone he was the secret keeper so that he would be targeted, and if he actually did die, others who knew the secret and were more inclined to share it wouldn't be able to." Harry didn't see it, but Amelia's face frowned in realization and a little bit of shame. It was exactly something Sirius would do, and if the secret was only given by parchment, no one would know who the actual secret keeper was. One of the Aurors spoke up, but he confessed. Amelia answered back, if it was Sirius's idea to use Peter, he would have felt responsible for their deaths regardless, something that would have become known had he been given a trial. She said that last part with more edge than she intended. The other Auror said, "But those Muggles he killed." Harry said, "If Peter survived, then the question of who actually killed those Muggles is no longer certain." By this time they had reached the fat lady's portrait and Harry said, "Balderdash." The fat lady looked questioningly at the guests, but as they had Auror robes, she did not hesitate to open up. Before the group could enter the common room, Harry said, "Wait here a moment." He then walked up to the redhead playing chess and said, "Would you mind bringing your rat in his cage? I saw something unusual about him. He might be special." The redhead looked confused for a moment and said, "Scabbers? Special? Not that dingy old rat. How old exactly is that rat?" The redhead looked pensive for a moment and answered back, 10 years I think. Harry smiled back and said, "Rats normally die of old age after 2 years. Can you please fetch him?" The redhead looked more confused but said, "All right," before heading off to his room. Amelia and the others heard the conversation and Harry motioned for them to enter. Harry said, "The only thing they found of Peter was a toe, and according to the letter my mum wrote, Peter was an unregistered rat animagus. The rat he's bringing is missing a toe on its front paw, and as you heard, it has been with his family for 10 years. A moment later the redhead brought the cage containing Scabbers and Amelia quickly took it from him. When she looked at the rat within, it looked back at her and backed into a corner. She gave a cruel smile at this and directly reached into the cage and grabbed the rat. She let the cage fall with her other hand before grabbing her wand and tapped the rat. A moment later the rat enlarged into a grotesque fat man. The cruel smile deepened as she practically sneered, "Hello Peter." Before the man could even whimper, a stunner was sent by another Auror. Harry quickly thought of something and said, "If you take him back to the Ministry, galleons will likely be used to delay his questioning before removing the source, just like they were to keep my godfather from a trial. Would it be possible to question him in an unused classroom before taking him away?" Madame Bones considered it and was disappointed to admit Harry wasn't wrong. Although not compliant with regulations, she wasn't going to let Sirius stay in Azkaban for another moment if she could. Another Auror said, I did bring Veritaserum. A witness would be required, but if we call McGonagall and Dumbledore, they'd fit the bill, I'd think. Amelia said, I do believe Dumbledore has a flu in his office. Using it to leave but doing a few things with the headmaster as witness before we head out would not be unacceptable. The Aurors left with Peter floated out with magic, and the common room remained silent for only a moment before bursting into questions. Harry did the best he could to answer and promised the redhead he would replace his pet. The events that followed were somewhat summarized by the Daily Prophet. Posthumously awarded Order of Merlin third-class winner found alive as a marked Death Eater. The testimony given under Veritaserum proved he killed those 13 muggles and framed Sirius Black, who was never the secret keeper to begin with. He was the one who led Voldemort to Godric's Hollow that night and ran away when his master was vanquished. Harry's concern about Pettigrew, however, proved accurate when the rat reportedly escaped custody with help from an unknown assailant. Luckily, the earlier testimony was enough to warrant the trial of Sirius Black, who was found innocent of all charges and admitted into St. Mungo's Wizard Hospital for care. As if trying to make up for the blunder of imprisoning an innocent man and allowing the guilty party to go free, the Minister of Magic in his great wisdom thought to assign 100 Dementors to guard the school in the case of Pettigrew's return. Harry was conflicted over that last part. His quest very clearly said to master the Patronus charm, which he did a week into the first year, but would that have been needed if Harry hadn't captured Pettigrew? He thought the quest wasn't a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then again, perhaps he would have needed it anyways. He still hadn't defeated Voldemort, and it was said the man could control the blasted things. Of the quest requirements he had for the year, mastering the Patronus charm and defeating the Basilisk were the only 2 things he had completed. He still didn't know anything about the Philosopher's Stone he was supposed to protect. Sure, academically he knew it apparently could turn base metals into gold and produce an elixir that would heal any wound and stop a person from aging for a time. He also understood in all likelihood Voldemort wanted it and Harry had to stop him from getting it. But how? Harry had no idea where the thing was. If he were Dumbledore or Nicholas Flamel, he'd give it to someone and ask them to hide it, obliviate that person of the knowledge they had of it. Then when the time was needed he could ask them where they would hide it if they did have it. Using that method, Dumbledore could even have told Hagrid to hide it in the Forbidden Forest and obliviated the knowledge of doing so from Hagrid. There were too many perfectly undefeatable ways to protect something using magic, and if Dumbledore hid it, there should be no way for anyone to find it, right? Of course, this was under the assumption that Dumbledore was competent. Harry's stomach felt cold when he thought that his assumption relied on this for some reason. At the moment what he knew was that Quirrell wanted him dead and likely entered Harry in the tournament. However, Harry had no proof one way or another that Quirrell was connected to Voldemort or not. He knew someone opened the Chamber of Secrets, and although Harry took care of the Basilisk, the culprit remained unknown. Harry kinda hoped that was Quirrell as well, but he couldn't rush to judgment. Worst case scenario, Harry would have to fight Voldemort, Quirrell, whoever released the Basilisk, an army of Dementors, all of Voldemort's Death Eaters, and Peter Pettigrew all at once. Oh, and if any of them got the Philosopher's Stone, Voldemort might end up immortal. And Harry had a ball to attend, a submarine to build, and training to do. At this point Harry was tempted to ask a teacher for a time turner, but that would constitute assisting a student with the tournament, so they couldn't do it. Harry wondered at this point if faking his death, again, would be easier than Hell mode. Harry already found the part of the settings that would turn things into ranked dungeons, and Harry turned it off forever. Even if there were fabulous prizes at the end, Harry didn't want to have to go through something like this again, ever. Harry decided for the final boss he would cheat as much as possible. Like stocking up on one-use overpowered items and filling his inventory with them. Harry had to create them, but he was coming along. He was tempted to buy a gun or a pile of grenades, but unless he built them from scratch himself, the exotic energy he released would change the physics of them and likely prevent them from working, or worse, would make them go off prematurely. It was a little-known fact that magic shields didn't protect against bullets. Most magic shields were designed to block magic. There are in fact spells that repel or block arrows, but the force of a bullet was 20 to 70 times more condensed than a primitive arrow, and Harry hadn't found a single spell he felt capable of stopping one. In order to have a magic-proof gun though, Harry would have to rune inscribe the bullet, the shell, and every single individual part of the gun. He would also have to make and press his own ammo for that to work. He couldn't buy his own. Thanks to that, he couldn't simply whip a gun out of his inventory and pop Voldemort between the eyes. Well, he could, if he suppressed his own exotic energy to the level of a non-magical. But then obviously he couldn't use magic. Perhaps as a plan M. Harry also had that treasure trove of nice things he looted from Salazar's study. Going over those tomes on parcel magic runes made Harry feel like Christmas had come early. There was also a large amount of very nice ritual magic and blood magic tomes. Harry was sure whoever controlled the Basilisk didn't know of that room, or those books would have been taken long ago. The problem, oddly enough, was that very few of those nice things, even the blood magic, were of any use to Harry at the moment. Since Harry's blood turned back into magic particles and faded away a few minutes after leaving his body, any blood magic Harry performed would not last longer than a few minutes. This did, however, provide some opportunities. Blood magic, even using your own, was illegal in Britain with very few exceptions. But if he didn't need the effect to last long, Harry could potentially perform blood magic and later there would be no evidence. This meant although Harry couldn't use any of the really powerful blood magics with long-term effects, he could use short-term effect ones like those that boost magic and such free of risk. The parcel runes were more useful for Harry's hobbies and he already incorporated them into his magic-resistant rune scheme to place on electronics. It was thanks to that his helicopters could even fly in proximity to a dragon without getting fried, as dragons practically emit a medium-level spell's worth of exotic energy just from breathing. Harry really wanted a magic-proof rune scheme, but even months of paused times turned up no way to create one with just what he had. Harry, however, didn't let all his worries get him down. Not today, for today was a very special day. It was the last class of the last day before the winter break and it was also potions class with Snape. Hermione fidgeted every so often at the beginning of class, but luckily the potions professor's attention was on Harry, so he missed the signs of nervousness. The professor had placed his cauldron on the fire a few minutes ago and was currently berating everyone except Draco for not being perfect, even making up things to accuse people of as he pleased. Potter, your ingredients look like they were sliced by a blind drunk. He pointed his wand at Harry's ingredients and cast an incendio charm, burning them all to a crisp. 5 points from Gryffindor for wasting ingredients. You'll receive a 0 for the day. Suddenly Snape heard a sound that was forbidden in his classroom. A snicker. He turned to face the sound but found not one, but several people seemingly trying to hold back their laughter. He sneered and said, "What could possibly be so amusing?" One of the slightly braver Slytherins pointed at Snape's cauldron. Snape turned and saw that his cauldron bore several words that glowed in bright pink letters. "Snape treats me horribly, no wonder he doesn't have a girlfriend." Snape quickly pointed his wand at the letters and cast a quick cancellation spell at the letters, but it did nothing. He then used a cauldron cleaning spell, but that too had no effect. The snickering got louder. He turned to Harry, of course, but the boy didn't even look up. Harry was staring at his book through his perpetually broken glasses, which he still wore to every one of Snape's classes. The fact that he still turned in good work when Snape didn't sabotage him remained one of the great mysteries of Hogwarts. Snape of course played his part and deducted further points from Harry. His only evidence that Harry did it was his lack of a denial when asked. Of course everyone knew Harry didn't speak in that class, so everyone saw it as a low blow. After class, Harry got the message he was looking for. Ping. Quest complete, Heir of the Marauders. Reward, Animagus perk. Harry smiled inwardly. Quest rewards really were quite good. Neville had already turned to Hermione and asked, "How'd you do it, Hermione?" She looked abashed and said, "I used a solvent and chemical that stained his cauldron." The chemicals the stain was made up glowed pink in the presence of pewter at a certain temperature. It wasn't a magic reaction, so he couldn't cancel it. And since it was an active chemical reaction, his cleaning spell wouldn't work unless he used it for a few minutes. Harry put his arm around Hermione and said, "You pranked a teacher, I'm so proud of you." She looked sideways and removed Harry's arm. "I did lose the bet." The twins somehow heard about the prank and congratulated Hermione on it after questioning her thoroughly on how she did it. Seems they intended on starting up a joke shop and she'd given them a number of ideas. Oddly enough, Hermione really clicked with the pair as they were both brilliant and knew lots of Muggle chemistry along with charms and potions along with their applications. Hermione actually got the idea for the prank during one of Harry's lessons with her. His scholar rank progressed not just when teaching magic, but any subject. Harry abused this of course and brought Hermione's mundane studies up with every week, and at the moment she was at freshman level high school in chemistry, algebra, biology, and physical sciences like basic physics and geology. Harry was hoping that teaching her enough to get her accredited for a GED by the summer would be enough to get his scholar rank to 21. She could then start college level material, and by the time she finished Hogwarts, she'd be able to get into any university and do whatever she wanted. She was Harry's first student and he had already become quite invested in her future, so he wanted her to be the best she could be. After getting Hermione a dress on the first day of the winter break, Harry snuck out of Hogwarts and headed to Gringotts to get more British pounds and eventually bought a personal sub about the size of a motorcycle and a large amount of extras. Harry invited Hermione to carve the magic resistance runes into the submarine parts, which she accepted as long as Harry answered her questions. "I understand how the runes work together, but why does this prevent magic from destroying it? I mean, we're using magic to make the runes, aren't we?" Harry considered the best way to translate how it worked and answered back, "Imagine that magic is like water and that electronics don't like water. This castle would be raining all day every day and us students are worse than sprinklers when we use magic." Hermione nodded and Harry continued, "This rune scheme uses magic to hold back magic. It is basically like covering the electronics in a layer of water, then freezing the water into ice. The ice surrounds the electronics, preventing more water from getting in, and the ice itself doesn't penetrate the electronics, so they still work because they're not technically wet." It was actually more complicated than that, as the volume the runes prevented the magic from penetrating was not so easily described. However, as long as Hermione practiced, she could use these rune schemes in the future herself to prevent electronics from frying around her. Harry already showed her how to suppress her magic like a muggle, so she wouldn't be trapped in the magic world like other muggleborns. The Yule Ball came and went without fuss. Hermione looked as stunning as a 12-year-old in a dress could be, and Harry looked nice in a tuxedo as well. Hermione enjoyed counting off each person she caught staring at Harry aloud just to mess with him and break the tension. Before the last day of 2004, the parts of the sub had been inscribed and reassembled. The fully assembled sub could actually be shrunken and re-enlarged without breaking, something he only was able to do with the stereos before. It allowed Harry to bring it to Hogwarts in his inventory and place it in the Black Lake. The sub had a remote control which Harry used to sink it down and partially bury it. He could remotely set it to come up when he needed it, so he set a timer that would automatically bring it to the surface of the lake near the shore at 11:01 a.m. on February 24, a minute after the first task was set to begin.